Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know, I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. That Trump has been exposed from within his own inner circle. He didn't see it coming. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, Trump's been exposed with the Yemen Trap, but he has Zionist wall hawks working against him in his own cabinet. Let's get into it.
Serve the American people is bombing Yemen. Why did we have to do this? Why did we do this? Well, Jeffrey Goldberg over at The Atlantic says that he was let in on a group chat that was planning the bombing of Yemen just last week. He was accidentally added to a signal group, and he thought, that's kind of weird, but he lurked instead and kind of watched what was happening. He says the person who did this was Tim Walz from the Walz. Say his name.
He's a spy from the deep state, exposing Trump in his first illegal war crime, which is bombing Yemen, killing a bunch of innocent people. This guy right here, the deep state, exposed him. You see, they just letting Trump know, man, we're going to make sure you don't succeed in anything that you're doing. You will not break up the deep state because we're right around you.
And kind of watched what was happening. He says the person who did this was Tim Walz from the Walz. Say his name. I can't find it here. I will find it for you. From the Trump administration. And he watched as Trump senior officials, cabinet members, continued to debate whether they should do this, how they would do it, and when they should do it. And it shows us that there is, in fact, dissent inside the Trump administration. Now, Michael Walz. It's a strange story. And taken at face value, it would indeed tell us, okay, well, some inside the Trump administration did want to bomb Yemen for this shipping route that the Houthis had blocked in the wake of October 7th. And some did not, particularly the J.D. Vance camp had said, I don't think we really need to do this. There's a lot of nuggets in here, but it's also would be illegal because one, Walz himself had set messages to disappear, which is against the law. Two, it could be a setup for various reasons, such as the part in here, and you should read for yourself. Do we have screens of it? Shall we put it up?
Yeah. Okay. So here, this is from The Atlantic, where he writes, Jeffrey Goldberg says, the world found out shortly before 2 p.m. Eastern time on March 15th that the United States was bombing Houthi targets across Yemen. I, however, knew 2 hours before the first bombs exploded that the attack might be coming. The reason I knew this is that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, had texted me the war plan at 11:44 a.m. The plan included precise information about weapons, packages, targets, and timing. This is going to require some explaining. So it's interesting that he says Pete Hegseth sent it to him because we know Mike Waltz.
They've been holding meetings on the Hill about this all day. This is all over the news, the world. Then I looked at some of Europe saying, can they trust the U.S.? They set Trump up. Now it look like his cabinet is incompetent, and their war plans could easily be leaked to Russians or Chinese or the Iranians or other terrorist groups. Yeah, this is bad.
Who's a neocon, who, if anyone should be fired, I'm hoping it's Mike Waltz, because he is the one who's been really kind of driving us towards war with Iran. He is the one who wants war with Iran. So he is a neocon inside the Trump administration. I would love for Mike Waltz to be the one that gets fired here. But anyway, why is he saying, Pete Hegseth texted him the war plans from the Signal group? Well,
he was lurking in the Signal group and he saw these texts, such as this from J.D. Vance, who had previously said, I'm not sure we should do this. I'm not sure POTUS understands the implication, but if you think we should do it, just do it. But then we're going to have to bail Europe out again. And let's make sure our message is tight here. To which Pete Hegseth says, yes, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic, but we're the only ones who can do this. To which later another administration official says POTUS wants to do it. It's a green light, so we're going to do it. And then some planning of it. Now, what's kind of weird is that this planning that goes on, battleship type bomb X5 right now at this time with these bombs, why would that happen in a signal chat when none of the recipients on this chat have access to that? Why would they have to know that? You would think that you'd need to tell the bombers, but do you need to loop in Marco Rubio on the exact military strategy? Right? I'm not using the right words, but you understand what I'm saying.
Right. Well, also, I mean, and we heard from John Kiriakou, who was a former CIA agent, and said that this leak is a violation of the Espionage Act, at least according to the judge in my case, Judge Leonard Brinkmia, a Clinton appointee, said that providing national defense information to any person not entitled to receive it is worthy of 10 years in prison. Accidental or no accident, it's beyond time to rewrite the outdated and politicized 1917 Espionage Act. So that's pretty crazy,
right?
And again,
well, Trump already
why was this?
He don't know nothing.
Why are they using Signal to communicate?
Right, Signal. The reporter points out clearly is not an ordained messaging platform.
Yeah.
It's not used.
Trump already came out. They asked him a question on the news. Like he never even heard. Who? What happened? Email was released. Man, shit, they knew Trump was lying, but Trump getting on the record. I said, I don't know nothing. Everybody can go to prison except for me. I didn't leak nothing. I wasn't in the email. I didn't know nothing about war plans getting leaked. Yeah. And they outed the name of a CIA agent, which they need to hurry up pull that guy out the field before he get killed.
Inside of any kind of war room. It's not archived. So why would they be doing that? And then not be careful with who's on the group chat. Now, all of us have copied in the wrong person on group chats. I mean, raise your hand if you haven't, right? But this feels very purposeful. And Brian Hughes, a spokesperson for the National Security Council, has said that it appears to be an authentic message.
Played themselves with this Zionist, war-hungry, maniac bullshit. I watched them while Biden was in office. I watched them while Barack Obama was in office. They always yelled from the top of their lungs, you can't go to war without coming to Congress. That was Republicans' talking points, except a handful. Majority of them. I even heard Trump say it. You can't go to war without going to get authorization from Congress. But they're using the war on terrorism. That's why they call anybody a terrorist before they start bombing, because under George Bush's BS in Iraq, which Barack Obama continued and Biden continued. See, they never gave a damn. They ain't on all that. As long as you call somebody a terrorist, they got the right not to go to Congress. See, Republicans is exposing they bullshit, but this is Trump. Trump had every right to say no. Bombing people is war. They're trying to make like killing people. Oh, that's not war. Your vessels are being shot at and someone being hit by the Yemeni rebels, the Yemeni soldiers. That's called war.
Chain, and they are reviewing how that happened. But again, the fact that it's not an ordained communication platform, that Walz had set some of his messages to disappear after 1 week or 4 weeks, raises questions about whether you're violating the federal records laws. And again, is there a message here that they want other countries to hear, such as the European Union? And I mean, I don't know. Have we not been clear about our sort of disdain for the freeloading of European nations?
Yes.
Did we need to leak this in another way? What would be the advantage of doing it this way?
The only thing I can think of is if they're trying to torpedo one of these people. So are they trying to torpedo Hegseth? Are they trying to torpedo Mike Waltz?
They got
right.
all of them.
But again, Mike Waltz apparently is
Michael Waltz, the one done it. He's a neocon. Trump should never. They got all of them. Everybody who was on the text exchange who didn't stop it, who didn't say, "Whoa, you can't do." You're done. Your ass can get 10 years in prison. They got you right. That's why Trump is smart. He the only one came out and said, "I don't message. I didn't know that." No, if his name would have been on it, he said, "Oh, I got hacked because I didn't accept that." Come on. They done it to Trump on purpose, just letting them know, man, the deep state not finna lay down while him and Elon Musk playing crazy. They'll hook you up to some federal charges just this quick. Y'all done leaked classified documents and war information and send it to a reporter. How crazy can you be?
the one that added Jeffrey Goldberg to the chat from the Atlantic. So it'd be great if Mike Waltz is the one that actually gets pushed out. But again,
like someone would have done that from his phone, and then he gets in trouble. Like, I don't know how that happened.
Nah, they got to interrogate him. Who told you to do that, man? Who you really work for? Because you don't work for Trump. You did that on purpose. Why did you do that? And no amount of lies. You see, this guy, he got to be in prison. Trump should give his ass 10 years immediately for what he just did. But Pete Hegseth, the so-called white supremacist state, the head of the military right now, he got to go too. He got to go too because he definitely was behind this nonsense. He ain't over his head anyway. He gonna get a bunch of soldiers killed.
Hard to say, but again, it seems like all of the strategy right now is pushing this towards Hegseth. Like they're trying to get Hegseth fired.
You think?
I clearly it seems that way. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It just seems crazy to me that the journalist would like hang out in there. Like if I accidentally got added to a group chat and I realized it was like the vice president, the secretary of defense, I'm like, I'm out of here before I see anything at all.
Yeah, well, Jeffrey Goldberg is really a sleazy guy. So, like, let's be honest here, okay?
Oh, what I would do is I would say, "This is Natalie Morris from Redacted." Am I supposed?
Don't let that go over your head, Goldberg. Huh? Small hat, Goldberg. They send it to the small hats. So the small hats is the ones. Remember, we already said the deep state is the small hat. They scared to call them the deep state, the swamp monsters. And all these other clowns, they designers, they work for but it's the small hats who tighten the screws on Trump. They want this war with Iran or else it's going to be all kind of bullshit like this.
Supposed to be here, and I would screenshot that and I would save it because I would not want to be framed for anything.
Yeah.
And I would make damn sure that everybody acknowledged my presence. There's no way I would lurk in a group like that.
I know you guys are sharing some war strategy here. Just want to let you know this is Clayton from Redacted. You guys added me to this group chat. Like I see that you're planning this war in Yemen and making these bombing runs. Am I supposed to
be here? Want me here?
Sure you want me to be
I don't
here?
know if you guys are familiar with like Telegram and those channels, but what they do is it'll actually show that you've read the message. Like it shows who's seen it. So they would know that you're seeing that information.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know how this happened, but apparently there are 18 other people on this whole chat. So
now another piece of this is, again, the part that JD Vance is pushing back. He doesn't seem to want to escalate war in the Middle East. And he and his spokespeople had to say, well, we're on board with whatever POTUS wants. If POTUS greenlit this, we are the company guy. We're all good with it. So even though the chat does seem to indicate that there's hesitation about escalating, and that is what we would know, that's what we've seemed to be reading from other sources, is that the vice president and the president absolutely do not want to escalate in the Middle East. And that seems to be what Steve Witkoff, their Middle East envoy, is saying as well. So are they setting up who is for and who is against it? Because that also makes this quite clear.
Yeah, they're trying to call people out publicly about this, like going to war with Iran. Like here's who's on board and who's not. And we know that Mike Waltz is fully on board with this. So get these neocons out of there. But it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the worst.
They're gonna go to war. Trump done already said Iran can't have nuclear weapons. Got to dismantle this nuclear program. What, man? Dad, you're not gonna get nowhere with that. You must be talking about war. That shit not gonna work. So he definitely, when he let it come out of his mouth, so he can't pretend like, no, they're forcing me. Nah, you are saying this shit, and this is on you.
In terms of looping in the wrong person. Last week, I accidentally texted in Portuguese from my watch.
And they've been shooting at them every day. They won't stop. They continuing to shoot. Now, see, this is a distraction. What about the war that's going on with us and the Houthi rebels right now? Are you winning?
To Clayton's mom.
Hell no.
That's not the same.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling better about that mistake.
Sting Fury says, hey, you guys are promoting lies. No, this has been widely reported. In fact, the White House confirmed this. So this is now confirmed by the White House that yes, these text messages did leak out. And it was first reported in the Atlantic, which I wouldn't normally trust the Atlantic at all, but the White House did confirm it. So
we're reporting the reporting and trying to parse out why.
Yeah.
So we've not reported any lie. So Kiss My Butt show is brought to you by Hillsdale College, because if you have a passion for
Signal, an app. This is an unsecured app. It's more secure than. So this is extremely disturbing, outrageous, careless, insane. This story is unbelievable, but it is the truth. It's real. It happened. A group of cabinet heads got together on Signal, an app. This is an unsecured app. It's more secure than other apps if you're going to be texting and messaging people, but it's still not a skiff. And what they were doing should have been done in a skiff. So a lot of cabinet heads got together on Signal and they planned war with Yemen. They actually gave away national security information, secrets, top secret information over a Signal app. And how was this discovered? Well, because part of the thread, they accidentally added an Atlantic journalist, one that's not even friendly to the Trump administration, one who Trump has called out and criticized a number of times. This journalist was somehow accidentally added to this thread where cabinet heads illegally, actually, and we'll go over why it was illegal, waged war with Yemen and gave away national secrets. So this is the story. This is from The Atlantic. The journalist is Jeffrey Goldberg, and he at first thought, like anybody would think, that it was a joke or somebody was trying to bait him into some sort of, some giving information or taking information and putting it out there and thinking he's a great journalist. And really it was just all a big, bunch of bad information. So Jeffrey Goldberg was at first skeptical when he first saw on a Signal app a person named Michael Waltz adding him, wanting to message him. Now, Michael Waltz is Trump's national security advisor, I believe, is who Michael Waltz is. Yes, he is the national security advisor. Okay. So Michael Waltz, the national security advisor. So he's thinking, oh yeah, right. The national security advisor wants to message me on Signal. Okay, sure. We'll go along with this. And he went ahead and, accepted the addition and didn't really think anything of it. Just thought, okay, we'll see. This is probably just a spoof. So a couple of days later, he receives a notice from Michael Waltz establishing what is called a Houthi PC small group. And the message from this Michael Waltz character says, team, establishing a principals group for coordination on Houthis, particularly for over the next 72 hours. My deputy, Alex Wong, is pulling together a Tiger team at deputies agency's chief of staff level, following up from the meeting in the sit room, which is situation room, this morning for action items, and we'll be sending that out later this evening. And then the message continued, please provide the best staff POC from your team for us to coordinate with over the next couple of days and over the weekend. Thanks. So over the next couple of hours, a bunch of names started popping into this chat thread, and it was a bunch of aides helping cabinet level people, including Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Tulsi Gabbard, JD Vance, there were John Ratcliffe for the CIA. There were all of these different cabinet level officials, and their aides were popping in, adding them into this chat. And again, Jeffrey Goldberg just thought, yeah, okay, this is just a big joke. Well, but I'll just sit back and kind of watch and see what they talk about or whatever. And he became, he was skeptical the entire time until this was actually confirmed. So I just want to kind of fast forward and sort of give away the plot here, but this was confirmed. This actually was them. And they actually were planning war with the Houthis in a Signal app. This has been confirmed now. They've admitted it. And now they're trying to backtrack on some of the stuff that they said. But the journalist was like, I don't know if this is real, but it turns out it was. So in the text chain, let me actually just show you some of the text that ended up coming about. So they started this a couple of days earlier. And then when they started to actually start talking about Yemen, these are the types of things that were said. So JD Vance comes in and says, Pete Hegseth, if you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing Europe out again. And JD Vance then says, let's just make sure our messaging is tight here. And if there are things we can do up front to minimize risk to Saudi oil facilities, we should do it. So they're already starting to coordinate bombing Yemen. And the journalist doesn't want to give too much national security information in the piece. So he says that he actually skips over and he's not revealing all of the text messages because it gives out actual national security information. But I mean, this journalist shouldn't have even been there. Imagine if they just would have accidentally added somebody else who wasn't even an American or a journalist, who, wouldn't have hesitated to use this information against the country. I mean, this is why you're supposed to do this stuff in a skiff. So it goes on to say that the first thing that he noticed was that JD Vance that responded first saying, team, I'm out for the day doing an economic event in Michigan, but I think we're making a mistake, is what JD Vance said. The Vance account goes on to state 3% of U.S. trade runs through the Suez, 40% of European trade does. There is a real risk that the public doesn't understand this or why it's necessary. The strongest reason to do this is, as POTUS said, to send a message.
Now, 3% doesn't affect us. This is all BS. We could have World War III. We could crash our whole economy playing these games. Now, if it isn't, we're not doing it for the U.S., then who are we doing it for? The Zionists. Who did they leak this to? Goldberg, a small hat. You see, this is just to let Trump know they everywhere. They're not playing with him. They're even amongst his inner circle, and they will leak their war plans. Now, somebody got to go to jail behind this.
So that actually precedes this text message that you're seeing here on the screen of JD Vance saying, if you think we should do it, then okay, let's go. At first, JD Vance, being an America First guy, was actually hesitant about this. He was sitting there like, 2%, 3% of US trade runs through the Suez Canal. 40% is Europe. So this isn't for us. This isn't something that's going to be good for America. 3% of our trade runs through this route. The beneficiaries of this route are Europe, the Middle East, and China, actually. The US only has 3%. So he's saying, there's a real risk that Americans are going to find out about this and that Americans are going to realize, what do we have to do with the Suez Canal? Oh, nothing? 3% of our trade goes through there? That's minimal. Let's not get into a war over 3% of our trade. Let's just reroute or whatever. And so he's right to say, I don't think the public is going to understand this. So the only reason to do this is to send a message. But for who are you sending a message to? You're not sending a message to the Houthis for the United States when it's 3% of our trade, and they weren't even targeting U.S. ships. So you're sending a message on behalf of Israel, and JD Vance realizes that the America First movement is strong. People are not really all that for this whole waging war for other countries thing. And so JD Vance hesitates. But then JD says, but if you think we should do it, then all right, let's do it. But let's make sure we get our messaging together because, this could actually fall off a cliff real quick. A person identified in the Signal app as Joe Kent, who is Trump's nominee to run the National Counterterrorism Center, wrote, "There's nothing time sensitive driving the timeline. We'll have the exact same opinions in a month." So he was kind of cautioning, like, do we really need to do this today? Because they're talking about bombing Yemen. And he's like, is this something we really ought to be doing? No. Then at 8:27, a message arrived from the Pete Hegseth account. Now, remember, he's writing this as he didn't know these people were actually the people. He thought that this was like he was being spoofed or something. But in actuality, this really was the people. And here's what Pete Hegseth said, saying to the VP, "VP, I understand your concerns and fully support you raising with POTUS important considerations, most of which are tough to know how they play out. Economy, Ukraine peace, Gaza. I think messaging is going to be tough no matter what. Nobody knows who the Houthis are, which is why we would need to stay focused on 1, Biden failed, and 2, Iran funded." So they're gaslighting America.
Very important. That's a very important piece, and he need to be fired. He need to step down and probably go to jail too. Nobody knows who the Houthis are. I thought you told me you was bombing them. You bombing weapon facilities, and you bombing the missile factories, and you bombing the leaders' home. That's what you said. That's what you said on the news. But behind closed doors, hey man, we don't know who they are. It's just a bunch of people over there. We don't know if they Houthis or they not. So we're just gonna be killing people and lying on TV. That's what he's saying. This man need to be arrested. That's the head of the U.S. military right now. Damn fool.
Americans right here. I mean, they're saying, wow, this Biden failed, so we got to correct Biden's mistake. And these are Iran-backed terrorists, and that's why we've got to do this. So nothing about this is good for you, the American. This is instead, we're just doing this to get back at the fact Biden failed, and we're just doing this because Iran, we just have this thing about Iran or whatever it is. Then the Hegseth message goes on to state, which you see here on the screen, waiting a few weeks or a month does not fundamentally change the calculus. Immediate risks on waiting. 1, this leaks and we look indecisive. 2, Israel takes an action first, or Gaza ceasefire falls apart and we don't get to start this on our own terms. We can manage both. We are prepared to execute. And if I had a final go or no-go vote, I believe we should. This is not about the Houthis. I see it as 2 things. Well, I would like to know, Pete Hegseth, what do you think this is about? Because if it isn't about American trade, because it's 3% of our ships, then what is this about? He says, restoring freedom of navigation, a core national interest, okay, we have literal pirates like off the coast of Somalia. We have pirates all over the ocean that affect probably 1 to 3% of U.S. trade. So, yeah, I mean, I guess you could go after any and all pirates, but to wage war on a country is a whole different thing. So he says restoring freedom of navigation, a core national interest, and 2, reestablish deterrence, which Biden cratered, but we could easily pause. And if we do, I will do all we can to enforce 100% OPSEC, which is Operation Security. I welcome other thoughts. Then a few minutes later, Michael Waltz, the account, posted a lengthy note about trade figures and the limited capabilities of European navies. He says, whether it's now or several weeks from now, it will have to be the United States that reopens these shipping lanes. Per the president's request, we're working with DOD and state to determine how to compile the costs associated and levy them on the Europeans. So here's what's really insane. The ships that were actually targeted were Israeli ships. But they're talking about, look, like this doesn't really affect U.S. trade. It's like really for the Europeans, but it's also major and most importantly for the Israelis. Yet they're going to levy onto the Europeans the cost of this mercenary action. I mean, this is us acting as mercenaries. It's not at the benefit of U.S. national security. This is just us doing a job for you because it's better for your security and your shipping and your trade routes. So now they're talking about what are we going to get for this military action? So that's how you know for sure this is not a matter of national security that affects the U.S. people, you and me. Doesn't affect Americans. This is just like, we're going to go do a dirty job, but we better get paid for it. Who's going to pay us? I mean, that's what they're saying here in this chat. So he's saying, you know, how do we compile the costs associated and levy them on the Europeans? Like, we got to make Europe pay for this. What about Israel? Israel never has to pay for it, even though this is really decisively for them. Then the account identified as JD Vance addressed a message at 8:45 to Pete Hegseth, and he said, if you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing Europe out again. And we read that message that JD Vance, here's that one. If you think, let's just do it, but, you know, let's make sure our messaging is tight. And then Pete Hegseth said, yeah, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. But Mike is correct. We're the only ones on the planet on our side of the ledger who can do this. Nobody else even comes close. Question is timing. I feel like now is as good as time of any. Given POTUS directive to reopen shipping lanes, I think we should go, but POTUS still retains 24 hours of decision space. So Pete Hegseth is saying European freeloading is pathetic. But remember, this entire operation is for Israel. The Houthis were very specifically targeting Israel because Israel had gone back on the ceasefire agreement. They had a ceasefire agreement with the Palestinians, with Hamas. And rather than move to phase 2, after phase 1 of the 3-part phase agreement was complete, everybody did phase 1. Israel did phase 1 mostly. Hamas did phase 1 mostly. You know, everybody pretty much did phase 1, and they were to move on to phase 2. And Israel decided they didn't want to move to phase 2, and they wanted to renegotiate the ceasefire deal. The Hamas said, no, we have a deal already. We want to move on to phase 2. And Israel put the blockade back up. They started starving the Gazans. They started bombing them. And then the Houthis said, well, you broke the ceasefire agreement. And we told you that we would stop bombing your ships. So as long as there was a peace, so as long as there was peace and a ceasefire, you did that. We stopped bombing. We stopped targeting you. But now you're targeting again. So we're going to target you. And the Houthis were only targeting Israel. So this was just really a thing for Israel. The United States is doing it, but blaming it on the Europeans, like we're doing a dirty job for the Europeans and we're going to make them pay for it. And really this whole thing's for Europe. And they're saying, oh, Europe is freeloading on us and that's pathetic. Well, what about Israel? Because the target was Israel. No one else was being targeted. It was Israel the whole time. And the only thing the Houthis asked for was keep going with the ceasefire agreement. We'll stop targeting you as long as you go back into the ceasefire agreement that you already agreed on. And stop starving the Palestinians and stop bombing them. It's that simple. That's all we want. And then we'll stop targeting you. It's a very simple thing. So we decided to instead bomb the Houthis rather than tell the Israelis to stop bombing kids in Gaza. I mean, that's what we were doing here. So it says at this point, an account called SM joined an account called SM, which I guess, there it is. We have that right there on the screen at the bottom. This one joined the conversation, and it's believed that this person is probably Stephen Miller. And this person says, as I heard it, the president was clear. Green light, but we soon make clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. So they're wrapping Europe and Egypt into this. So they're saying we're going to make Egypt pay and we're going to make Europe pay, but nobody mentions Israel. says, we're going to make clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. We also need to figure out how to enforce such a requirement. E.g., if Europe doesn't remunerate, then what? If the U.S. successfully restores freedom of navigation at great cost, there needs to be some further economic gain extracted in return. And Pete Hegseth says, agreed. So again, we're mercenaries. That's all we are. This has nothing to do with a national security. This is just us doing a dirty job for Europe and apparently Egypt. No mention of Israel. And we expect to get paid for it. That's what the U.S. military has turned into. We're no longer really about America first, national security. We're just about being paid for hire. You know, we're just going to bomb and defend, and it's all going to be paid. It's all for hire. And at some point, you have to ask, who's going to be able to hire us? You know, is there a limit on who can hire us? Are we just we're going to claim allies can hire us to do these dirty jobs for them? And you might feel okay with that because, well, it's our allies. But who gets to determine who our allies are? And at what point do we say, well, you're no longer an ally. This one who was our enemy who we protected you from yesterday, today they're our ally, and now you're the enemy because they're paying us more. I mean, that's where this leads. There's going to be no loyalty or real, allegiances. When you put yourself up for hire like this, it's up for the sale for the highest bidder. So then the journalist Jeff Goldberg just thought, I've seen this. We'll see what happens. And the next morning, this is where he says he realized, that was a real chat thread. It says at 11:44 a.m., the account labeled Pete Hegseth posted in Signal a team update. And he says, I'm not going to quote it because it gave actual national security information in it. But essentially they were saying, look, we're going to bomb Yemen, and this is when we're doing it, and this is how we're going to do it. And after that, the journalist sat in his car because he was at the grocery store, and he was like, are they really going to bomb Yemen right now? Like, they're saying they're going to do it right now. So I'm going to wait in my car and see if Yemen gets bombed and see if this is real. And sure enough, Yemen gets bombed right when the chat said Yemen would be bombed. And that's when he realized, I'm actually in a top secret conversation that I am not supposed to be in. And he realized this only after the Signal thread said, we're bombing. Here's where we're bombing. This is what we're doing. He checks Twitter. Twitter says, Yemen just got bombed. This is where they're being bombed. And the Signal app, this is what the guys start saying. They start saying, excellent, a good start. Yeah, they start cheering, saying, all right, on target. We bombed Yemen. Good job, Pete and your team. The team, great job. Everybody, great work. Powerful start is what they're saying. And he realized, I'm in a conversation of national security. I need to exit out of this. So at that point, the journalist exits out of the chat. And he wonders, is anybody going to notice that this name he would just identified as JG, similar to how SM was just, several of them had only gone by their initials, like Tulsi Gabbard was TG and he was JG. And he thought, are they going to notice that this JG left the chat? But nobody said anything. Nobody reached out to him. And he was like, wow, they didn't even notice that they had an Atlantic journalist in this chat thread. And then I exit and nobody said anything. I mean, this is how completely amateur hour this whole thing was. So he goes on and he asks, he starts to reach out and he says, let me just find right here where he says, this is a major breach. He says, I've never seen a breach quite like this. It's not uncommon for national security officials to communicate on Signal, but the app is used primarily for meeting planning and other logistical matters, not for detailed and highly confidential discussions of a pending military action. And of course, I've never heard of an instance in which a journalist has been invited to such a discussion. Conceivably, Waltz, by coordinating a national security related action over Signal, may have violated several provisions of the Espionage Act, which governs the handling of national defense information. According to several national security lawyers interviewed by my colleague Shane Harris for the story, Harris asked them to consider a hypothetical scenario in which a senior U.S. official creates a Signal thread for the express purpose of sharing information with cabinet officials about an active military operation. And he didn't show them anything that was actually, he didn't show the lawyer what was actually shared, but he says, hypothetically, what would happen here? And he's like, yeah, that would be a violation because you're supposed to do that in a skiff. That's where you're supposed to do it. On Signal, you can coordinate meeting up in the skiff. You could say, hey, we need to talk about Yemen. Let's meet in a skiff, right? You can do that. But you're not supposed to actually plan the bombing of Yemen on an app. You're not supposed to do that. on a third-party app. The government has ways of sharing official information like this, top secret information, and it's not over Signal. So there's that. Then there's also the fact that we have cabinet level officials planning to wage war. I mean, they basically plan right there, waging war with a foreign country, which is an act that Congress is supposed to be taking. We have a separation of powers. Congress is supposed to declare war. Congress is supposed to decide when we bomb, because we, the American people, suffer the ramifications of this. If they trigger World War III without our consent, and then we start getting bombed in American cities, we better have signed on to that. But we're not able to sign on to that. We don't get to sign on to that because our leaders in America are now just bombing without ever asking Congress. When was the last time we declared war? World War II. That's the answer. Did we even declare war in World War II? I wouldn't be surprised if I just, I'm thinking it was World War II, but I wouldn't be surprised if I look back. Well, actually, we didn't really even declare war then. Says that the other thing to take into consideration here with all of this is, so first of all, they shouldn't be using an app. Second of all, they need to be in a skiff. Third, they need to be, war needs to be waged with congressional approval. And none of that happened. And this was just absolute amateur hour for them to then also include accidentally, or maybe not accidentally. I mean, maybe there was somebody, maybe Michael Waltz, the national security advisor, did want the journalist in on it because he was like, these idiots are constantly doing this stuff. I mean, one can speculate because it's just such a blunder to add a journalist in accidentally that part of you kind of wonders, was it accidental, or did he add in, or did the national security advisor add in the journalist because he's like, this is how these people run things, and this should be leaked to the press because this is a total violation of the trust of the American people, how things should be done. This is just complete amateur hour. It shouldn't be done like this. And Americans need to know that this is not an American first agenda. This is not what people voted for when they voted for Donald Trump. And that should upset you. And even if you are, the biggest Donald Trump fan, and the biggest Pete Hegseth fan, and the biggest JD fan, and JD Vance, give him props. He was the only one in this thread who was like, I mean, this is like 3% for America, 40% for Europe. I mean, really? I mean, I'll do whatever the president wants, but I'm not really all that, I'm not really all that for that. Now, let me see here. At the end, when this journalist actually reached out to officials, when he was like, hey, did you guys know that I was in this thread? This is what let me just scroll through this article and get it. So he says, he sent an email to Waltz, and he talked about the messages in the Signal app. And he said he also sent this email to Pete Hegseth, John Ratcliffe, Tulsi Gabbard, and other officials. And he says in an email, he asked, did they know I was included in this group? Was I, on the off chance, included on purpose? If not, who did they think I was? Did anyone realize who I was when I was added or when I removed myself from the group? Do senior Trump administration officials use Signal regularly for sensitive discussions? Do the officials believe that the use of such a channel can endanger American personnel? Brian Hughes, the spokesperson for the National Security Council, responded 2 hours later, confirming the veracity of the Signal group, saying, quote, this appears to be an authentic message chain, and we are reviewing how an inadvertent number was added to the chain. The thread is and then the person, of course, spin. This is the spin. Says the thread is a demonstration of the deep and thoughtful policy coordination between senior officials. The ongoing success of the Houthi operation demonstrates that there were no threats to troops or national security. That's the only thing they care about. They're like, well, as long as we don't put troops in harm's way, we can just bomb the hell out of whoever we want. We can wage war with whoever we want as long as we don't put American troops in harm's way, because that's the only thing that's going to trigger Americans to be upset, is if we kill Americans. But if we kill everybody else, it's fine. And if we do it for hire, even better. I mean, and then, this guy has that gall that actually says, oh, but this thread, can you believe this person says this? This thread is a demonstration of the deep and thoughtful policy coordination between senior officials. Deep and thoughtful. Did you guys see these texts? This is the text. These are the deep and thoughtful messages. No, guys, this is not deep or thoughtful at all. This is just like this is not a skiff conversation where you actually outline who are we going to kill. And they killed children in this bombing. 5 kids were killed. Kids were killed. And they're like, deep and thoughtful conversation happens, And then William Martin wants to, he wants to cover for JD Vance. And he says, that despite the impression created by the text, the vice president is fully aligned with the president. It says the vice president's first priority is always making sure that the president's advisors are adequately briefing him on the substance of their internal deliberations. Vice President Vance unequivocally supports this administration's foreign policy. The president and the vice president have had subsequent conversations about this matter and are in complete agreement. So covering for the fact that J.D. Vance actually hesitated and was like, I don't know. Is this really in the best interest of America? I'm not really sure if I'm all for this. So, I mean, just absolutely incredible that this happened. Absolutely incredible that this was leaked like this. Amateur hour, and not just amateur, like, oh, what a blunder, but beyond that. I mean, why are they conducting national security like this on an app and not in a skiff? Why are they making decisions about waging war that could trigger a serious war and serious consequences for the American people? Why are they doing that without congressional approval? A lot of questions that need to be asked here. And again, if you are a giant Trump supporter, great. But we always have to hold our officials accountable, because no one's going to do things exactly the way you want. And if they did, it would be you. You would run for president. You would be president. You'd be making all the decisions, and you'd agree with all your decisions. But it's perfectly normal to not agree with somebody you support, as long as you agree with them most of the time. And that number's up to you on how much you want to keep supporting them. For me, my number's about 85%. I need to support you about 85% for me to support you. I don't have to agree with you 15% of the time. And I can criticize you 15% of the time for me to vote for you and support you. But your number could be lower. I mean, it could be, well, as long as I agree with you more than 50% of the time, and that's fine. So you've got to be able to criticize the fact that this administration has made a giant blunder, and that this is not an America First policy, first and foremost. Secondly, a lot of other ramifications with this. This was a blunder. This was massive fail, guys. What a mistake. Amateur hour. What the heck is happening? Oh my gosh. But really, more than anything, we want war to be waged by the American people if we're going to be waging war. But at this point, we're so used to it not being that I don't know if we're going to rise up enough to actually make a change there. But it absolutely should be done. The question is, will it?
Before Max Blumenthal joins us now. Max, thank you very much. What I thought would be a conversation about people from escaping from Venezuela and then being returned back against their will because the government without evidence says they're gang members, and what I thought would be a conversation about what is to be gained by bombing the Houthis now, of course, begins with a conversation about Jeffrey Goldberg and the Atlantic and how his name got in a list of senior American national security officials. I do want to ask you about Venezuela, and I do want to ask you about the Houthis. But to get to this very hot topic now, and Mr. Goldberg, whom I don't know, and you probably know or know of, being included in a text thread about targeting individuals and the use of various American equipment with which to do it in the Houthis is fascinating and very, very serious. What's your take on this? How did Goldberg get into that mix?
Well, by Jeffrey Goldberg's own admission, he received a signal.
Our new member in the House of Revolutionary, our brother Warren Webb, for getting his membership, who helped us keep the lights on. Revolution is way of life. I absolutely appreciate the love, soldier. Salute to you.
A message from Mike Waltz, the National Security Council director, 2 days before he was apparently mistakenly brought into the 19-member Bomb Yemen signal chat of Trump national security principals and top Trump advisors. Why was Mike Waltz reaching out to Jeffrey Goldberg? Let's look at Jeffrey Goldberg's history. This is someone who, as a young man, was a follower of Meir Kahane and made Aliyah to Israel and became a prison guard at the Ketziot concentration camp, guarding Palestinians during the first Intifada, wrote a book about it, sort of reformed himself, but remained a key bigwig within the Zionist world and became one of the Beltway media's top access journalists partially as a result of that. And so Jeffrey Goldberg, during the run-up to the Iraq War, was used by Dick Cheney to draw a link between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. In the New Yorker, Dick Cheney cited Jeffrey Goldberg's reporting twice in Meet the Press appearances. Under Obama, Benjamin Netanyahu used Jeffrey Goldberg to try to push the Obama administration into attacking Iraq. Goldberg was pushing out all these stories that an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear sites at Natanz was imminent unless the U.S. would step up and do something. And now there's momentum again for an attack on Iran, and suddenly the NSC chief reaches out to Jeffrey Goldberg because obviously he was looking to move the neocon message on behalf of the neocon elements in the Trump administration. And it looks like Goldberg was in Mike Waltz's phone and he brought him into this group. To me, it has to be a mistake. Otherwise it's suicidal, because Jeffrey Goldberg, while being pro-war, while representing a neoconservative element, is also editor-in-chief of one of the most anti-Trump magazines in the country, in the Atlantic. So why would you bring him in to this smoke-filled chat room?
So Mike Waltz literally brought him in, but he must have thought it was somebody else's phone number?
Well, if your name is showing up as a bubble that has your first two initials on Signal, it could have been the U.S. trade representative whose initials were JG. It doesn't seem like Mike Waltz or whoever's operating Mike Waltz's devices is the brightest bulb. And so there it was. I mean, what else could the explanation be? We're hearing from Trump cultists that what really happened was Trump was trying to get some kind of secret message out there, which resulted in hugely embarrassing hearings today at the Senate. So it really just doesn't stand to reason that this was intentional. It was an own goal, but they were lucky that Jeffrey Goldberg was the man in there, because what did Jeffrey Goldberg do once he discovered that this chat was real? It wasn't some kind of prank. He did the opposite of what I would have done.
Right.
What I think any adversarial
would have done would have been absolutely protected by the Pentagon Papers case. The government is stupid enough to raise the blind and let you look in. You're a journalist. You're entitled to publish it. It's of material interest to the public. Instead, absolutely. Goldberg shut it down.
Absolutely. Jeffrey Goldberg went and basically told the manager that he was in a place he wasn't supposed to be. Why would he do that? He left the chat. Any journalist, I mean, what I would have done was I would have stayed in there, gathered as much information as possible. I would have had a best-selling book. I would have had hundreds of scoops. I would have seen how the sausage is really made. This is an illegal war. And that's what the story really should be about, is the policy. But what Jeffrey Goldberg did by leaving, then telling the White House, then blowing this whole thing up, was to make it an OPSEC failure scandal, which is sort of a palace intrigue about a bunch of bumbling idiots, from the stupid party who aren't supposed to be in these posts that should be occupied by really smart guys like Jake Sullivan, screwing around with national security. The real story is a gargantuan empire waging an illegal war without congressional approval on a poor besieged country because it is controlled by the only force on the planet that is actually taking up arms to stop the Gaza genocide, which Jeffrey Goldberg supports. So Jeffrey Goldberg didn't want it to go there. He steps away, makes it about OPSEC, about bumbling fools, and that fits with the whole Beltway press culture, which wants us to be
why are Trump, Hegseth, even Sebastian Gorka trashing the Atlantic rather than trashing Mike Waltz?
Great question. Why isn't Mike Waltz fired?
Right.
I mean, Trump
Why
fired.
isn't Mike Waltz being prosecuted? That kid, Jack Teixeira, is in jail for 20 years for revealing far less relevant, far less timely national security data than what Waltz caused to be revealed by Goldberg.
Well, even from the point of view of Donald Trump, I mean, he just made Trump look bad, very, very bad. And Trump tends to fire people when they do that or become vengeful towards them. He's fired hundreds and hundreds of Department of Veterans Affairs, longtime employees. But unlike Mike Waltz, they don't have the backing of Miriam Adelson. I mean, Mike Waltz is there for a reason. He is a longtime Israel lobby plant who rose through the congressional ranks because he is an anti-Iran hardliner. And so his position for now is secure. And if I were even Pete Hegseth or any of these other not very cultivated Trump principles, I would still be very wary of dealing with Mike Waltz ever again. And what Gorka and Hegseth are doing by just attacking Jeffrey Goldberg as a leftist, fake news media journalist, non-journalist, is trying to keep the Trump base secure. Those, the Hegseth even brought up Russia, like the Russiagate hoax. And that's to make the Trump cultists believe that this is actually some kind of fake scandal that the liberal media is putting on Trump, when in reality, it's about the Trump administration being heavily penetrated and controlled by neoconservative elements like Mike Waltz, who are reaching out to Jeffrey Goldberg to sell a policy that contravenes the America First policy that Trump sold his base. So it's all just like before we see a kind of a circular firing line, they're circling the wagons to protect, number one, Donald Trump, who has sold out his base already within just a few months.
I'm going to play a clip in just a moment, but before we do, one of the things that Goldberg quotes Hegseth as saying, and this is really crazy in light of what has happened, is that Hegseth says, no one knows who the Houthis are.
Criminals.
Just say Biden failed,
you don't even know,
and Iran funded them. Good Lord. If no one knows who the Houthis are, he doesn't know who he's trying to kill and why he's trying to kill them?
That's a big part of the story. The news can't keep that quiet. This in black and white. This a real text. They went on TV saying they were bombing the leaders of the Houthis, military facilities. Well, in your private text messages with the leaders of the government, you're saying, we don't know who they are. So just say Biden failed and they are ran back, which that's what they keep saying. So whenever you hear that, remember, they really don't know who the hell they bombing. And they admitted that. That's criminal. They should be charged.
Well, he's basically saying the American public doesn't care and has no idea why we should be fighting these people in Yemen, because they clearly pose no threat to the American public. JD Vance, who's sort of on the other, Hegseth's on the Trump loyalist, Trump lackey side of the debate. He'll do whatever he thinks Trump wants. And once the policy's handed down, Hegseth's job is just to sell it to the public. He's just a Fox News hack. Mike Waltz is on Netanyahu's side. He's playing the role that like a Mike Pompeo would have played in this administration. And then on the other side, you've got Joe Kent, who is operating under Tulsi Gabbard as her counterterrorism director, and JD Vance, who are sort of the realist, more cautious voices. And you can see both of them speak out against the policy. This is why I thought it would be so valuable if you had an actual journalist in there, unlike Jeffrey Goldberg, who would have stayed there and documented all of the debates as they panned out. But Vance says there's no American interest being advanced here. Only 3% of U.S. shipping goes through the Suez Canal. What we're basically doing is protecting European shipping. He doesn't say Israeli shipping because that's the only thing that the Houthis were planning to attack. And then Joe Kent says, why are we operating on such a tight timeline? We could wait even longer, another month, because Kent is trying to delay the war. Both of them are clearly against it, but they ultimately have to fall in line like good soldiers, or they won't have careers. So So there's a debate going on there. And what we can see through these very valuable conversations is an acknowledgement that this war on Yemen serves no national security purpose for the United States and is not protecting Americans.
It's an absolutely unlawful act that they are engaging in. Congress doesn't even have the ability to declare war against Yemen because Yemen poses no threat whatsoever to the United States. Turns my stomach when this happens. And I did not know about Goldberg's background. Goldberg was actually a prison guard for the IDF.
Yeah, he actually laid hands on defenseless Palestinian prisoners by his own
Is
admission.
he an American or is he an Israeli?
No.
Well, it looks like he's both. He was born in the U.S. and he was bullied as a boy and got into Meir Kahana's fascist ideology because he thought, I want to be a tough Jew who can fight for himself. And then he made Aliyah. He emigrated to Israel and joined the Israeli army as a young man, became a prison guard. He was assigned to guard Palestinians who were arrested during the First Intifada, and then went on to write a column for the Jerusalem Post, an Israeli newspaper. And that's where he sort of cut his teeth as a journalist. Then he came back to the U.S. and wrote this book, Prisoners, about how he actually became friends with one of the men he was guarding. And they learned that, it was wrong and that they should make peace, of course, peace on Israel's terms. And Goldberg emerged subsequently as the leading.
Now imagine this small hat that he's describing is the guy that they accidentally tagged into the war plans and these secret classified documents bombing Yemen. That was no goddamn accident.
Pro-Israel journalist in Washington, which made him extremely important to every administration. Like if you want to speak to someone who has the confidence of the Israel lobby, but who's also kind of a liberal, writes pretty well and writes for the New Yorker and the Atlantic, of the enlightened magazines, then you go to Jeffrey Goldberg. That's why he is one of the key access journalists in Washington. That's why Mike Waltz reached out to him.
And what you've just said would be known to Mike Waltz.
Absolutely. I'm sure someone in the lobby told Mike Waltz. And for Waltz, like getting Goldberg to carry your leaks and being able to use him to move the message is especially important because Goldberg represents someone from the enemy camp, from the other side, but you share something in common with him. You both want to see the U.S. attack Iran.
Chris, here's Hegseth denying that war plans were discussed in the text, even though I haven't seen the transcript, according to Goldberg, they talked about time, place, and manner, and identity of people they wanted to kill. So how he could say war plans were not on there, I don't know. But here he is, cut number 13.
Why were those details shared on Signal, and how did you learn that a journalist was privy to the targets, the types of weapons used?
I've heard I was characterized. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that.
Right,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
The NSC said it was authentic.
Play the next one, Chris. This I think you've seen this, but you'll get a kick out of it. Number 14.
Can you share how your information about war plans against the Houthis in Yemen was shared with a journalist in the Atlantic, and were those details classified?
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does. I would love to comment on the Houthi campaign because of the skill and courage of our troops. I've monitored it very closely from the beginning. And you see, we've been managing 4 years of deferred maintenance under the Trump administration. Our troops, our sailors were getting shot at as targets. Our ships couldn't sail through. And when they did shoot back, it was purely defensively or at shacks in Yemen. President Trump said, no more. We will reestablish deterrence. We will open freedom of navigation, and we will ultimately decimate the Houthis, which is exactly what we're doing as we speak from the beginning, overwhelmingly.
According to Pepe Escobar, who was there in Yemen, and we interviewed him yesterday, all they've done is destroyed residential neighborhoods and kill civilians.
Well, that's the Hegseth exchange I was referring to, and he's right that Goldberg should be a discredited journalist, and maybe among MAGA elements he is, because he pushed the losers story that Trump called World War I soldiers losers, according to some random source. But many of his stories have been discredited, but in this case, and Goldberg is traditionally very deceitful. But in this case, it looks like he's telling the truth. They haven't poked holes in anything that Goldberg has said. The issue for them is that Goldberg is now claiming that classified information was not just discussed, but exchanged in that Signal chat group. Goldberg was too cowardly to bring it out and too deferential to power to show us what it was. But that's what he's claiming, which puts them in a world of trouble and raises other questions. I mean, it is an OPSEC scandal, but I don't think that's the real scandal here. Why didn't they use the secure line that the NSA has established for national security officials? There's already a secure line. Why did they use the Signal app, which, as we know, we know the U.S. intelligence has a backdoor into Signal. What were they doing?
Here's a frustrated Senator Mark Warner trying to get to the bottom of whether this is classified or not. Chris, cut number 6.
My communications, to be clear, in a Signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
Well, we will make that determination, because if it's not classified, share the text with the committee.
There was no classified material that was shared in that.
So then if there was no classified material, share it with the committee.
And that's perjury.
You can't have it both ways. These are important jobs. This is our national security. Bobbing and weaving and trying to, filibuster your answer. So please answer the question. If this was Director Gabbard, if this was a rank and file intelligence officer who did this kind of careless behavior, what would you do with them?
Senator, I'll reiterate that there was no classified material that was shared in that.
And if there's no classified in materials, share. And then if there's no classified materials, then you can't even answer the question whether you on the chat. This is strangely familiar, and I think my colleagues will remember when you couldn't answer the question, is Edward Snowden a traitor?
I wish he hadn't gone there, but his other criticisms of her is sound. How can they say that information about the who, what, when, where, and how of killing people in another country in an undeclared war is not classified?
Well, it's Tulsi Gabbard's job as Director of National Intelligence to put her foot down and say, we shouldn't be doing this. We should be using the secure line. And who's on here? She's supposed to be in charge of the operational security. And now she's sort of hung out to dry by the sloppiness of Mike Waltz, but she's also at fault here. Tulsi Gabbard on March 13th, just a few days ago, tweeted a thread where she threatened leakers, and she listed various leaks that have come out of the Trump agencies, specifically the national security agencies, where she wanted to see FBI prosecutions. And she was vowing that Kash Patel from the FBI would crack down. That took place almost exactly at the same time, that Twitter thread, that Mike Waltz initiated contact with Jeffrey Goldberg to leak neocon pro-war stories to Goldberg. And then soon after led him into this group where allegedly classified information was passed on. And now Tulsi Gabbard is claiming that, nothing wrong took place. Let's take a look at some of the leaks that she thinks should be prosecuted. One of them was from U.S. intelligence officials telling the New York Times that this Venezuelan gang, which according to the Trump administration has supposedly taken over parts of the country and is waging war on America and is invading America, and therefore necessitates the invocation of the 1798 Alien Enemies Act, placing the United States on a war footing against the government of Venezuela, that this gang actually has no involvement with the government of Venezuela, and that it poses very little threat to the United States national security and actually has a very small footprint inside the United States. So obviously they want to prosecute the leaks that contravene their propaganda, their official messaging, but they're protecting their own. In this case, on a much more serious leak situation.
She won't even admit that she was on the thread. Chris, cut number 7.
Director Gabbard, did you participate in the group chat with Secretary of Defense and other Trump senior officials discussing the Yemen war plans?
Senator, I don't want to get into the specifics.
Ma'am, were you on? You're not going to be willing to address. So you're not, are you denying, Matt, will you answer my question, ma'am? You were not TG on this group chat?
I'm not going to get into the specifics.
So you refuse to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat?
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you going to get into the specifics? Is it because it's all classified?
Because this is currently under review by the National Security
Because
Council.
it's all classified? If it's not classified, share the text now.
As the White House previously
Is it classified or non-classified information on this text?
I can confirm.
Director Radcliffe, were you on the group chat?
Senator,
one motherfucker in Trump organization brought all these phonies down. One, by bringing in the Zionist small hat. That's why Trump came out and said, I didn't know nothing about it. I don't what chat, what group chat. First time I'm hearing about this. This has been a whole day. He still acting like he didn't know nothing. Trump, if you ask him tomorrow, he gonna act like he just finding out. Trump crazy.
I was on a signal messaging group.
So you were the John Ratcliffe on that chat?
I was.
Thank you.
Here, before you respond, Max, this will raise your blood pressure even more, because you were talking about this earlier. Here she is. Well, you'll see it. Chris, cut number 5.
Tweeted just 11 days ago, and I'm quoting you. Any unauthorized release of classified information is a violation of the law and will be treated as such. So if this information is classified, what are you going to do?
Senator, 2 points here. First of all, there's a difference between inadvertent release versus
careless and sloppy,
malicious leaks of classified information. The second point is there was no classified information that was on
the information committee should get that information. Director
and the
Patel,
National Security
Director
Council.
Patel, my time's about out, and I'm going to use my 12 seconds that the chairman can. Director Patel, has the FBI launched any investigation of this?
Senator, I was just briefed about it late last night, this morning. I don't have an update.
I would like to get an answer by the end of the day.
Don't nobody know nothing, huh?
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't know if there's an FBI investigation, but that's pretty awkward.
Hard to believe that there isn't. I don't know how they could justify there not being an FBI. Why? Because Mike Waltz is my friend and I trust him. We campaigned together for Donald Trump. Is that the reason it's not going to be an FBI investigation? I think there's more here than meets the eye.
I mean, you also have all of these characters who were in this chat. They all have a record of calling for the prosecution of Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton for her indiscreet behavior with her emails, and Joe Biden with mishandling classified material, keeping it in his garage. So, I mean, the hypocrisy is kind of off the charts.
I want to get back to the Venezuelan.
All of these people, Tulsi Gabbard, Trump, his whole crew, yelled up and down, nobody has the right to go to war except Congress. The Democrats were war criminals. You got to bring it to Congress. The president doesn't have the right until they in power. Now they got the right.
The gang, they were deported not back to Venezuela, but to one of the worst hellholes on the planet that we know of, a supermax prison in El Salvador. And the government, of course, did this in defiance of a court order. And the statute that the government cited, the 1798 statute that you mentioned, provides for a hearing if the potential deportees want to say we are not aliens from an enemy country. So there was no hearing. How does the government know that they are members of a Venezuelan gang if it doesn't produce any evidence in court to support that?
Well, in this case, whatever you think about the immigration issue, the question is, do you trust your government? And if you just blindly trust your government, then you don't believe in the Constitution, because what was done here was unconstitutional and took place in an unjustified state of emergency or state of legal exception, where DHS officials fished in a cursory manner through the social media postings of these Venezuelan men, many or most of whom entered the United States legally through the TPS program. They didn't just run across the border illegally. They didn't break into the country. And they found that some of them had tattoos, or some of them were making hand signals to look cool in pictures, which I don't have any tattoos. I think it's kind of like it's a little bit cheesy to have tattoos at this point, especially someone like me. But a lot of these guys just had random tattoos. One of them had a tattoo of a Real Madrid logo, his favorite football club in Europe. Another one had a compass tattoo. Another one had a tattoo that said mom. And that was designated as gang tattoos that made them members of Tren de Aragua. Another guy held up his hands like this, like he's looking cool. You know, every heavy metal fan has done that. So they didn't even match the tattoos to the Tren de Aragua tattoos. I don't even think TDA members often have the kind of tattoos you see on MS-13 members, who are the veteran OGs that you'll often see in the Salvadoran jails or black sites that have been established by Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele. And so it was all a propaganda show for Trump, because his base was clamoring for more deportations. They weren't happening. And they had placed every single Venezuelan male in a kind of legal state of precarity by invoking the Alien Enemies Act. And they had to do something. And then Marco Rubio goes and basically breaks relations with the real government in Caracas in Venezuela by refusing to renew Chevron's lease to refine oil there. And then they want these deportations. So instead of sending them back to Caracas, there was just a deportation flight there yesterday. They send them to a supermax prison in El Salvador, a country they've never been. I would say most of these men have no affiliation with this Venezuelan gang. And they're subjected to human rights abuses on camera by the Salvadoran authorities. This kind of prison porn where they have their heads shaved and they're kind of frog marched in very uncomfortable positions, have their faces shaved, and then they're thrown into cells with hardcore killers and gang members. One of them was a gay rights activist from Venezuela. Another one was a professional goaltender from Venezuela. According to ICE, most of these men who were deported were not even accused of any violent crimes in the US. So the whole thing is completely bogus. But beyond that, the Alien Enemies Act that has been invoked by the Trump administration has been invoked on a completely fraudulent basis, which is that Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan gang, has been or instrumentalized by the Venezuelan government to wage war on the United States. So it's simultaneously put the U.S. at war with Venezuela, which is completely crazy. And it is
the government is using those criminals to terrorize the U.S. so they can demonize Venezuela. And those terrorists, if they don't want to be in Venezuela, then hey, be in El Salvador. But a lot of those individuals are absolutely tied to criminal organizations and like coyotes and human traffickers, you know. We can't be sitting here shedding too many tears for these people sneaking into America, or these people buying. Ain't no room around here for me.
Yemen's biggest attack since Trump came to the White House. Not even 24 hours after the U.S. strike on Ansar Allah's stronghold in Sana'a, Yemen launched a fast attack on the USS Harry Truman, with a barrage of winged missiles and swarms of suicide drones. They flew at low altitude and penetrated the carrier's defenses until they hit it precisely, according to the Yemeni military spokesman. It was the most difficult night for the US Navy and a state of confusion for the Israeli army and the Gulf states due to the qualitative development of Yemen's missile capabilities.
Now, the U.S. government said that they aircraft carrier and none of their ships were hit. They just were targeted and they shot everything down, blah, 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 shit they make up. Well, then we found out that they brought in another aircraft carrier and they just was going to send that one to another location. They lied.
What is the story of these missiles and drones that hit the most dangerous American warships, and how did they break their missile armor defense? Many of the secrets we reveal to you, dear viewer, in this video. Stay tuned. Yemen's Quds Wings missiles. It is a family of mobile missiles that Iran produced by reverse engineering from the Russian Kh-55 winged missile and sent them to Ansar Allah, which the United States considers a terrorist group. This class of missile is believed to have been used by the Houthis to attack the USS Harry Truman. The attack caused confusion and prompted several of the carrier's crews to retreat to the northern Red Sea. Trump accuses Iran of supplying the winged missile to the Houthis and vows to retaliate. Geometrically, the Yemeni Quds missile has the same design as the Russian Kh-55 version, as it relies on a simple design that provides it with high fluidity in flight, maneuvering, and changing trajectory. And the wings provide the possibility of changing altitude and maintaining the stability of the missile, which does not fly at high speeds. The Quds missile is guided by two guidance systems. The first is the inertial system, where a computer integrated into the missile structure reads and analyzes the data that received from sensors of temperature, speed, altitude, acceleration, weight, and gyroscope to determine its location automatically and without being intercepted or jammed by radar systems or early warning aircraft. And this system helps to maintain the highest possible accuracy of the hit. The second system is the Russian GLONASS satellite mapping system, which is similar to the GPS navigation system, but provides higher accuracy, with an error rate of no more than 5 meters. The Quds missile is 6 meters long, with 51 centimeters wide, and has a total weight of 2,650 kilograms, with a maximum speed of 800 kilometers per hour and a maximum range of 2,500 kilometers. The real danger is not in the missile's head, but in the process of deterring it, which is an impossible task because this missile flies at an altitude of only 6 meters, and in the most severe missions, it does not exceed 110 meters. These low altitudes make the missile invisible to American and Israeli radars. The Houthis also rely on mobile ground platforms to launch the Quds missiles, and they are powered by a turbine engine that uses liquid fuel, and this engine is characterized by its simplicity, low manufacturing costs, and low fuel consumption, which has a positive impact on the missile's range. Rubig Naval Missile. It is a Russian-made naval missile system that Yemeni army experts and engineers, with Iranian assistance, put into operation after it was out of service, and is one of the most prominent missiles believed to have been involved in the Yemeni attack on the aircraft carrier Harry Truman. This system is characterized by its ability to provide great firepower in the face of enemy ships, with its ability to move quickly in a way that contributes to increasing its ability to hide and maneuver before and after firing operations on the enemy. This missile belongs to P-15 Termit cruise missile family and is 6.57 meters long with 0.78 meters in diameter and has a wingspan of 2.5 meters. The missile weighs more than 1 ton, including a 513 kilogram warhead, has a speed of 1,100 km per hour and a range of 630 km. When launched, the Rubig missile flies at a low altitude of between 25 and 250 meters above sea level, depending on the pre-programmed setting before launch. And this inertial naval killer is guided by active radar guidance or infrared guidance in the final stage. By rehabilitating and fielding this system, the Houthis have acquired a naval weapon capable of sinking US aircraft carriers in the Red Sea, in addition to their other weapons such as the Mandeb 1 and 2 systems and the Falak missile. Yemen's drones raining on the US fleet. After Trump put him on the terrorist list, it didn't take long for the US president to send the aircraft carrier group Harry Truman to Bab al-Mandab. But the winds of Yemen brought the unexpected. Suicide drones flying at low altitude in the carrier's missile shield. And one of these drones succeeded in hitting its targets. And the US Secretary of Defense vowed to respond directly to Iran. As for the attack drones that participated in the latest attack, they start with the Qasef-1, which has a length of 250 centimeters and a wingspan of 300 centimeters, and is capable of flying for 120 minutes with a range not exceeding 150 kilometers. The Houthis say it is equipped with a target detection system and can carry a warhead weighing up to 30 kilograms. The Houthis also have suicide drones, which are fragmentation drones that have the ability to trick radar systems into detecting them and are guided to hit the target directly. These drones explode from top to bottom at a distance of 20 meters and have an effective and lethal range of 30 to 80 meters. The most dangerous is the Samad 2, with a range of about 1,000 kilometers, followed by the Samad 3, a suicide aircraft, with a range of 1,500 to 1,700 kilometers. In the end, the secret of the American inability to counter Yemeni attacks is that these armies are regular forces that are not suited to guerrilla warfare, that relies on drones and suicide on his attacks. On the other side, the US aircraft, like the F-35 and F-18, are not useful in such wars, and aircraft carriers, with their huge size, make them easy targets for drones and winged missiles. At the end of the video, dear viewer, who do you expect to win the Bab al-Mandab war, American aircraft carriers or Houthi missiles? Let us know in the comments, and don't
to talk about that, and I sit down and just start talking and see what comes out, and that's what I'm doing now. What I found interesting, I thought about this, this whole business about the US and the Red Sea, and I'm listening to one of these schmucks, I think it was Hegseth or one of these idiots, right? And they're like, yes, we're going to the Yemen. And Yemen, how was he putting it? It was basically, what he sounded like? He sounded like Wolfowitz and Pearl and those guys talking about shock and awe in 2003, right? We're going to intimidate those little savages, right? It was, yes, we'll go there. The other day, Sana'a, Yemen's capital, was rocking like an earthquake, and they got the message. And if they didn't get it, we'll keep it up until they get the message. All this rah, yada, 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 shock and awe bull crap of the empire, right? Let me start by saying this. You have to understand something about Yemen before we go any further. And that is one of their former leaders, who's since died, one of the Al-Houthi guys that they were named after, actually had a sermon. And in that sermon, he predicted that one day that God would bless Yemen to be able to confront the US empire in Israel. That was his sermon. That was his prophecy. Literally, the people of the Houthi, it's a Shia sect, they literally believe that this is part of a prophecy from God. And you think dropping a few bombs around is going to well, it's a prophecy from God, but hey, it's a bombs dropped. I think we'll stop. I really don't think that's going to work. Number one. Number two, what do they believe? They believe that the highest honor and the greatest blessing that you can get is to martyr yourself in service to God. So put the two together. What is it that deters people? What is it that frightens people, right? Have you probably heard the golden rule, right? The golden rule is this. The old golden rule is, give unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? That's supposedly the golden rule. And then Stephen Covey said something which was interesting in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I've read all the Covey books, a lot of good books from the Franklin Institute, but I picked up a lot of great things. But one of the things he said in the Platinum Rule was, no, figure out what other people want and give them what they want. Don't do unto others as they would have, as you would have them do unto you. Don't say, I like chocolate cake, and I wish somebody would give me a chocolate cake, so I'm going to give that guy a chocolate cake. Well, no, they may be allergic to chocolate. What's your favorite cake? Pineapple upside down. I'm giving you a pineapple upside down. Figure out what the other person wants. If you're trying to influence people, don't influence them based on how you think. Figure out how they think and influence them based on what they think. I had a friend that was a lobbyist, a very successful lobbyist, and she used to always say, we're lobbying all the time, Garland. We're always lobbying for people. If somebody asks somebody for a date, they meet a pretty girl or whatever the case, a young lady meets a guy and they're going to lobby them. Hey, this is why, they're going to try to impress them. Hey, I've got a nice car, or I've got a good job, or I'm in college getting an education, right? They're lobbying that person saying, I want to affect your decisions, and the decision I want is they need, right? Okay. If you're going to affect the Houthis, you got to figure out what they want. You can't say what frightens them, what it is that scares them, if you want to scare them, what it is that impresses them, what would have them do something. You want to influence them to do something differently than they're doing. If you're an idiot, if you're an empire, you don't do that. You say, we're frightened by big explosions because we're afraid to die, because we just want to stay home and Netflix and chill and play with our iPad and blah, blah, blah. So we don't want our Netflix and chill to be screwed up. So a big explosion would scare the bejesus out of us. So let's do that. We rocked their capital. We scared them. Now they getting the message. They ain't getting the message, you freaking idiot. That's not how it works. They ain't trying to Netflix and chill. They ain't got Netflix. They're not interested. You can't bomb their infrastructure. They ain't got much. The Saudis bombed them for 7 years. The Brits, I don't know how long, attacked them for I don't know how long. And they just keep on fighting and plugging away, buddy. And no matter how much you fight, they ain't going to stop fighting. They're just going to smile and say, is that all you got? It's like you see some guy getting a fight. Some guy takes a punch. Wham! And he hits the freaking guy with everything he's got. And the guy shakes his head and smiles and say, is that all you got? Bring it on. You better find an end to that fight. If you hit this guy with everything you got, you gave him all your might, you punched him as hard as you can in traditional fighting. I'm not talking about, say, self-defense or martial arts, but in traditional fighting, as we would think it, in a boxing match as it was, and you get a guy with your haymaker, bam, everything you got. He shakes a little bit and he smiles and says, oh, that's all you got? That's the best you could do? Bring it on. Yeah, you better go in the corner and not come out, because that guy you ain't going to hurt him, right? No matter what you hit them with, their answer is going to be the same. What a great blessing from Allah that we can tangle with the U.S. Ha, ha, ha. They're happy that they're fighting you. They're blessed. It's part of their prophecy. And these idiots are still doing shock and awe. That didn't work in Iraq. You bombed away the Iraqi military, and guess what happened? A insurgent army rose up and fought you till they got tired of fighting you. And they turned into ISIS at some point. But at any rate, and other things happen, bottom line is you're not punching these people out. You're just going to make them fight harder no matter what you do. So now apparently they're like, we're sending more ships, another carrier group. They'll be scared. Yeah, the Yemenis will be scared. There's another carrier group. They're going to go pray some more and say, thank you, God, you sent us another carrier group for the target. Hooray! They're having some success.
They sent in another carrier group because the first carrier group was attacked and the ship was damaged. They don't want to tell the truth.
They've shot down like 15 or something MQ-9 Reapers that go like $30 million each. My last I heard was $480 million, $500 million. They shot down more MQ-9 Reapers than they got infrastructure in their whole country. And you think you're going to somehow, it's stupidity. So now we got the Trump team doing really stupid stuff. You're going up against the Houthis in Yemen in the Red Sea. And what's your plan to stop them? They've already told you the only thing that'll stop them. Stop killing the Palestinians and starving them and cutting off their water. We'll stop shooting. Other than that, they ain't going to stop shooting. Now, what does Hegseth or whoever this idiot I'm listening to, he says, look, we'll stop when they stop. That ain't a good plan, dude. Not a good plan with the Houthis, because they ain't gonna stop. They ain't ever gonna stop. I was listening to, was it Lawrence Wilkerson recently, and he was saying that basically, even, you know, you're like, and we'll hold Iran responsible. Number one, he was saying, look, the Houthis don't listen to Iran. If Iran offers us some weapons, they'll take them, but they ain't listening to nobody. They're doing God's work. So sorry, if you ain't God, they probably ain't gonna listen to you. You can't convince them that you're God. Probably ain't gonna get far with the Houthis. They're doing God's work. And people outside of Yemen look at them and say, you know, there's a legal argument to be made. Forget the religious and the moral argument. That's one discussion that we could certainly have, and they could make their case for that. But legally speaking, their legal argument under international law is, hey, look, there's an ongoing genocide, as has been pointed out by the International Criminal Court or International Court of Justice, whatever the hell. I can't keep up with those courts that are usually run by the U.S. anyway, and the West. But so we have a legal duty to do everything we can to stop a genocide. Well, all I'm saying is this: regardless of how you feel about that, there is a legal foundation to their argument. There is a legal foundation to their argument. There's a moral foundation. There's a religious foundation. There's a legal foundation. So any way you look at it, they ain't stopping. What are you going to do? So you're going to bomb Sana'a? They're not stopping. They got a lot of their infrastructure, their military infrastructure is underground. They use mobile launcher systems. They bring them out at night. They move them around. They fire a bunch of them. They hide them again. How you going to know where they are? They got mountains. They got all kinds of stuff. How you ever going to figure out what they're doing and how they're doing it? Not going to happen. They can keep doing it. What are you going to do? Drop some bombs in the desert, kill some civilians? You can do that. You can bomb some civilians, and the only thing that does is make you look worse. They celebrate. Nobody's happy that they lost people, but they celebrate that more martyrs have gone to join, you know, their ancestors, and they'll all be blessed as a result of their martyrdom. And every time you bomb them, you know what happens when they bomb them? 1 million people in Yemen come out into the street and hold Palestinian flags and Yemen flags and say, "Hooray! We're winning." You bomb them, their answer is, "Hooray! We're winning." Because we're making you fight. We're winning. We're winning because we're in the fight against the U.S. empire. We're the Houthis, and we are fighting against the most powerful naval force on earth. We're winning. Just because they're fighting you, they think they're winning. So my point being, it's not a smart move by the U.S. to fight Yemen. Even, you know, I have my moral position on it, and I'm sure you do too. Notwithstanding our moral position, just the position of military and geopolitical strategy, you're fighting people who, they win from their perspective. Not only do they win by fighting, they get their blessings from God by fighting you. Get the opportunity to fight you is a prophesied blessing from God. Man, that's a fight you don't want. Why is this? Let me say this. So Trump comes in and he says, I'm going to be the peacemaker. What did he say? Remember this? I keep saying this over and over. Judge me not by the wars that I stop and the wars that I don't start. 8 weeks in, 12 weeks, whatever it is. I don't know how many weeks, a bunch of weeks in, not long. Let's see, January 20th, February 20th, March 20th. So a little over 8 weeks right now, right around 8 weeks. And you're starting a war that you can't get out of. See, that's the next thing. The United States empire, one of the things that empires do when they fall is these very foolish military adventures. They get in a fight over here, over there. We're going to bring the Russians down in Ukraine. Oh, we're going to stand up and we're going to take Iran down and all of the opposition to Israel in the Middle East. Oh, by the way, we're going to stand up to China over here. So we got to get the Philippines and South Korea and all of Australia. We got to get them ready to turn them into Ukraine 2.0 so we can throw them all at China and get them all killed too. You know, oh boy, big plans. And you can't even get out of the muck and the mire of Ukraine and the muck and the mire of the Middle East. I mean, you got to deal with the Middle East. But what's happening in Ukraine? You know what I'm saying? And that's why I'm saying the empire is crumbling. It's drowning in the Red Sea and it's crumbling in the rubble of Gaza, because before you even get there, which is disastrous, you tangled yourself up on Russia's border. A powerful world power You started a proxy war against Russia that you couldn't possibly win, and your allies are lunatics. They're delusional lunatics. Look at Keir Starmer and Macron. They're delusional lunatics, and they are virtually unarmed. You started a war in Ukraine, and what happened? I've been saying this for years. It's a garbage disposal for the Russians. It's an open garbage disposal. You know what it is? You throw your NATO weapons in, and they'll be happy to blow them up and throw them away and dispose of them for you. That's what's happening. So for the last 3 years, you've been throwing NATO weapons to Russia, and Russia's been doing what you do in a garbage disposal. Blow them up. Throw some more in, they blow them up. Throw some more in, they blow them up. Put in mercenaries, they kill them. Use Ukrainian soldiers, they wipe out a generation. Oh, we got to go down to 25. They throw that generation in, mowed down. Okay, we're going down to 18. Throw that generation in, mowed down. What are you going to go down to? You're going to have kids rolling up in strollers next? They got women, whole women battalions, mow them down. You're throwing every generation of lives in Ukraine as though that's a valiant thing to do. We're standing up to Putin. What are we doing? We're just getting everybody in Ukraine killed. Remember Lindsey Graham to the last Ukrainian? So you're over here mired in a war that a superpower finds existential. Trying to get out, ain't no way out, really. Ain't no real way out. Trump's like, hey, I'm going to get a deal. There's a level of diplomatic competence that's needed here, a very high level of diplomatic competence that's needed here. And right now, I just haven't seen the level of competence needed, because here's the bottom line. The U.S. and its allies are talking about negotiating, right? Let me tell you something. If you attack me and I get you down, I ain't negotiating, brother. I'll negotiate before you attack me. Okay, Garland, you got me backed up and cornered. Hey, man, I don't want no trouble. Well, I'll tell you what, Garland, we can negotiate. I'm ready to talk. I don't want to fight. I prefer not to fight. People can get killed. There could be knives. Somebody could shoot at somebody later. I'm going to do everything I can to avoid a conflict, right? I don't want any problems. You attack me. Now I got to fight. I ain't negotiating. If you get down, I'm finishing the fight. You should have started that before you started. I would expect if I got down, you'll probably stomp on my head. If I get you down, I'm stomping your friggin' head. I'm walking away from that fight. And you ain't if I win. And it's probably the other way around. At least that's what I'm going to think. You've attacked me physically. I'm going to think, if this guy gets me down, he's probably going to kill me. That's the way I'm fighting. That's how I'm fighting. I'm fighting that my life's on the line. Wouldn't you? Who wouldn't, right? If somebody assaults you, always fight like your life's on the line. That's what you got to be trained in, right? So here's my point. You attack Russia. They're fighting like their life's on the line. What are they going to negotiate? They got Ukraine down. They're going to stomp them into the ground. Now, they'll take an unconditional surrender. They've given you their list. These are the things that we want. You don't have to give them to them, because they're going to get them. Putin said this. President Putin said this very early. I remember this. I covered it. He spoke with Macron. And in that discussion with old Macron, right, he said, I will achieve the goals of the special military operation either through diplomacy or force of arms. At that point, what's he really got to negotiate? Okay, we're going to negotiate. Maybe you won't get some things. Well, let me see. If I continue the war, I'll get them all. If I don't continue the war, I got to give some up to you. Yeah, nah. Let's just keep going. Imagine you got a lawsuit and you're going to court. And you know you're going to win. It's just going to take some time. And if you win, you're going to get $10 million if you win, right? And so they come to you and they say, we'll offer you $250,000. You're like, this lawsuit suit could go on for 2 or 3 years, but I got 2 or 3 years. So you know what? $250,000. I'm staying in it. We're going to go to court because I know I'm going to win. For whatever reason, and you're the defendant knows that you're going to win, and they're trying to bargain with you for under 10 million because they know you're suing them for 10 million, and they know you're going to get a minimum of 10 million, and you both know they're going to lose. They're going to lose. And new evidence has come out to show they got no chance of winning. You could take the 250,000, or you could just say, you know what? Nah, let's take it to court, see what happens. I know I'm going to win. So I'm going to win. You can come back and give me the full 10 million and we can shut it down early. But I'm not going to take less because I'm going to get it. And I know if you want to give it to me now and save yourself 3 years of litigating and the legal fees for 3 years, fine. Other than that, Give me the money now or later. That's up to you. That's where the Russians are. We can take what we want. So you give me the money now or later. Money in my hand, bro. We got a deal. If not, I'm getting it sooner or later. The U.S. empire has to just simply say, yeah, we kind of lost this one. Now, Trump wants to interpret the loss and say, no, Joe Biden did this and put it all on Joe Biden. And the Russians said, fine, go ahead, we're willing to do that. I want 10 million though. I don't care how you spend it. Put that money in my hand and we'll end this lawsuit early. That's where the Russians are, and I don't think they're going to bend. And the U.S. Trump's problem is not a deal with the Russians, but he can't get a deal with the Ukrainians. The zeal, right? The guy converts this man, and the man that he converted is a greater believer than he is. That's the way it always happened, right? You've converted. The U.S. spent all these years strengthening the Banderite, Russia-hating virtual cultural religion in Ukraine so they could get Ukraine set just right in a mental way to attack Russia, to make the Ukrainians true believers in Bandera, to hate Russians with everything they could possibly get so they could weaponize that hate against both the Ukrainians and the Russians. They would get the Ukrainians to hate Russia so bad that the Ukrainians would never realize they were going to get the damn all self-killed because they were going against a country 26.5 times bigger than they are. So instead, it was like, yes, sir, we're ready to fight the Russians. Perhaps you should think about that. Perhaps maybe that ain't a good idea. You're going to get crushed. No, we hate the Russians and we're superior. We're the Banderites and we'll defeat the Russians. Why? Because the CIA brainwashed you into believing that. And now, guess what? The only way the U.S. can get a deal is if they actually denazify Ukraine themselves, and they're going to have to denazify Europe too, because those, if you looked at Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas and Annalena Baerbock, the Nazi princesses, dude, I mean, you could put little pencil mustaches on them. They're all goose stepping all over creation themselves. Let's just say they're not the most reasonable people on earth. They're extreme fascists, and they hate the Russians, and they're every bit as deluded as the Kiev people. You've got deluded fascists in Kiev, deluded fascists in London, and all over Brussels, you name it. And now the U.S. set this mess up, and they can't get out of it. So my point is, you got a disaster, and you're feeding money still, Trump. You're feeding money, and you're feeding weapons into Ukraine, and you can't get out of it. Meanwhile, in your a fit of absolute brilliance and wisdom, you picked a fight with the Houthis. And now you're going to send all this stuff as if you're not bleeding out in Ukraine, bleeding out money, bleeding out your diplomatic initiatives and strength, bleeding out your literally physically bleeding out of war material, of military material. You're bleeding out over here. Ain't bad enough. You got a knife sticking in your gullet over here. You're bleeding out. And so you decide to go pick a fight now without even stopping the bleeding over here, which is what empires do. You're going to pick a new fight and you're bleeding. Perhaps you should stop. Perhaps you should go to the hospital. Perhaps you should dress your wounds right here. No. You're going to grab the knife yourself and jiggle it around. Hey, I ain't bleeding enough. We need to bleed some more. Now let's go over here and get in the fight. How stupid is that? But that's what empires do as they fall apart. And where do you go? What was the Suez Crisis? When the same lunatics, the same idiots, the same warmongering fools that we're dealing with right now in Ukraine from Western Europe came upon the brilliant idea to go take the Suez Canal. They're going to go fight in the Suez Canal. And what did they do? Didn't work out well for them. They called the U.S. Hey, we need you to bail us out. We need us to be a backstop because we're getting our butts kicked. And the U.S. was like, yeah, I don't know. Probably not. And what did the U.S. do? It took the opportunity to take their empires. But while you're at it, since you're all screwed up now, we will completely unload your empire and take full control of everything, your money and everything else, you suckers. The United States, these empires, these so-called colonial empires, like idiots. I mean, look at it right now. We'll go fight Russia. They have no weapons. They got no soldiers, but they're standing up to Russia with no weapons and no soldiers. That's just brilliant, isn't it? Stand up to Russia with no, well, guess what? They were just as smart back then. Nothing's changed if you're a Western European ruling elite. We're going to go to Suez and we're going to fight, which happens to be on the Red Sea. Isn't it amazing? The sea of death for empires, right? Isn't it interesting? The Red Sea, that's where you go to drown if you're an idiot empire. Like to the Suez. The U.S. isn't even making it to the Suez Canal. Halfway up, we're like, well, we're going to defend the Suez Canal. That's basically what we're doing, defending the Suez Canal in Israel. The Suez Canal. What is it about the Suez Canal that's where empires drown? I don't know, but that's where we are now. So I'll continue. So now, Trump, Mr. the Peacemaker, he called himself the Peacemaker, right? So apparently, what do we know? We know that what we're told, we don't know anything for sure. We don't know what happened for sure. What we are told is that this is, as I'm reading now, don't hold me to this. I don't know that this is true. This is my best understanding of things that I can do. And that is that apparently Netanyahu called Trump and said, hey, I want to start the killing again. You know, let's start this war again. And Trump, a guy who, remember Mr. Trump? Remember this? Oh, we've got to stop the killing. There's killing going on. The Russians are dying. Ukrainians are dying. All these people are dying. We must stop the killing. Okay. Sounds good. You showed empathy for these people, right? And I'm thinking, oh, he showed some empathy. What does that mean? Okay. Netanyahu called, hey, you know, we got a bunch of men, women, and children. We're starving them, of course. We're starving them. That's what we do. We starve people to death. And, they're kind of hungry and thirsty, of course. They're living in tents. And we'd like to just bomb them to pieces, set them on fire, slaughter them like, we'd like to do. We'd like to start slaughtering innocent people, machine gunning them, just slaughtering innocent people randomly and claiming that we're fighting a war. Say, what do you think? And as I understand it, Trump's reaction was, make your move, brother. That's now. I'm not saying I'm 100% right, but my understanding is that Netanyahu asked Trump and Trump said, go ahead and move. Somebody, if I'm wrong, send me a link. If I'm wrong, let me know. Email me, whatever the case may be, put it in the chat. But that is my understanding that Trump, the guy who allegedly, ostensibly talked as though he was showing empathy in Ukraine, basically, all right, go ahead. Now, there is something that supports that, even whether he did or didn't do it. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Trump didn't do it. Or did, whatever, but let's say he didn't. It's going on. He knows what's happening. I know what's happening. Now, the Houthis then say that's wrong. A lot of people would agree with them. Slaughtering, dropping weapons and gigantic 2,000-pound bombs on men, women, and children, people, innocent civilians. You don't even have, a military, whatever. That's wrong. Okay. So what does Trump say? The Houthis are going to try to influence them, shall we say. Think about what are the Houthis doing. Number one, they believe they're doing their duty to God. Number two, they believe it's a moral duty. Number three, they believe that it's a legal duty under international law. And what do they say? We're going to fire some weapons, some bombs at the Israelis, which they're doing, missiles. Number two, we're going to do a economic blockade on the Red Sea, and we're going to hurt them economically. But it's not going to be random. Look, if your ship's going to help Israel, you can't go. If you're not, you can go. So it's not random. And the U.S. and Brits attacked, and they said, okay, U.S. and England, your ships can't go. And then we'll fight. So the U.S. says, well, yeah, we'll bomb you. And Israel's go, well, and the Yemenis, because the U.S. is like, we'll bomb you. And Yemen's like, oh, yeah, sure. Like, we didn't see that coming. Oh, what a shock. You're going to bomb us. Well, never had that happen before. Get out of here. We're going to do it. Let's fight. Let's dance. That's what the Yemen's basically saying to the U.S. And apparently there was something went out to the Yemenis that the U.S. is sending another aircraft carrier group and 35 more ships to confront the Yemenis. And the Yemen's answer was, thank you. Well, we'll welcome them. That was their answer. We're sending more ships to fight you. Thank you very much. We will welcome them. And I think you know what they mean when they say we will welcome them. So what we're looking at is we're looking at Donald Trump now saying, look, remember the whole thing, Genocide Joe thing, where Joe's what little party the U.S. had, I mean, the Democrats had left, whatever they had that they were calling a party, it came unraveled as a result of what was happening in Israel, in the Middle East, right? The party came unraveled. As I've said before, the Democrats they can't talk about the things that caused them to lose. One of them was COVID. There were a lot of people unhappy with a lot of COVID policies that wouldn't come back. And the other one was censorship. That didn't help. That hurt a lot of people unhappy with that. Last but not least, probably, in fact, the one that had the biggest effect was, well, I could just say foreign policy in general, but particularly the grotesque nature of the massacre in Gaza and throughout Lebanon. I mean, that just, a lot of people said, I'm gone and I ain't coming back, right? There's a term, you might have heard this before. I had a caller on my radio show last night, and he said, oh yeah, basically there's two bad parties, but you got to pick one. And I said, no, I don't. He said, no, I actually don't. And I said, have you ever heard the term deal breaker? I said, a deal breaker, I use whatever. I mean, this is I always use this because this is an easy analogy. Guys in a bar, young guys in a bar looking for the woman of his dreams. He meets a woman and she says, well, let me tell you a little bit. She likes him. She says, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I like walking on beaches, this, blah, blah, whatever, right? He's thinking, great. Oh, I like fishing. He's thinking, oh, I like fishing. Wow, a woman that likes fishing. He hears everything that he likes and he's like, I think I might find her. He has visions of 2.5 kids in a minivan. Oh, life is going to be good. He's met the woman of his dreams. And then she goes, oh, I left out one thing. And he's like, what's that? She goes, well, about once a month on a Saturday night, I got a chainsaw and I go out and kidnap somebody and I saw him to pieces. My hobby is I'm a chainsaw killer. And he says, deal breaker, deal breaker. Everything else looked good, but I married a chainsaw killer. Right? Deal breaker. And she says, well, I mean, nobody's perfect. Come on. I mean, we all have our weaknesses. I chainsaw somebody in half every now and then. Come on. I mean, you got to give me the benefit of the doubt. He says, I thought about it, but that's going to be a deal breaker. And he leaves. Right? Nah. And she's like, darn, I'll never meet anybody. Okay. Here's my point. Then I made to the guy. For a lot of people, a genocide was a deal breaker. There were a lot of people that said, I don't like the Republicans or Trump or whoever, whatever. Oh, I love the woke stuff and censorship is great and blah, blah, blah. They were 100% on board with the Democrats, God forbid. But they finally ran into a deal breaker and they said that's genocide, right? Okay, so the Democratic Party, in my opinion, came unraveled. Right now, the Democratic Party is polling, true story. I just did a video on 27%. They got two polls, CBS News and NBC News. I don't remember which one is which, but I do remember this. One of them's 29%. One of them's 27%. You ain't going to do real good in the midterms. Your party is in deep and serious trouble and they don't know what to do. But one of the reasons is because they can't admit ever that Gaza was one of the chief reasons that they won. There are numerous reasons, but Gaza was a big part of it. And a lot of people ain't coming back because of that. They can't talk about that. They can't admit that, right? Okay. Now Trump's about to get, he didn't learn anything apparently, because notwithstanding all of the rhetoric Trump came in about me and Joe Peace Guy, right? Joe Peacemaker. He's taken over a brutal warmongering empire. He's taking over a war machine. The U.S. empire now is nothing more than a war machine. That's all it is. The money goes to war. Why is it that we, as they say, can't have nice things? They're like, we've got to lay off all of these people at the Department of Agriculture, Department of Interior, people who, I don't know, they come to work every day and they do something that needs to be done or what doesn't need to be done. I'm opposed to laying them off. These are working class people. And you're going to lay these people off, right? I'm opposed to it. Now, here's what they say. We got to save money because it's too expensive to run this empire. Really? How much does it cost to send a carrier group and 35 ships with all the weaponry and all the things it takes to go fight Yemen for an indeterminate amount of time? Because you said, we're going to fight until they stop. And Yemen said, we ain't stopping until Israel stops. So how much is it going to cost? How much does 900 bases cost? How about if instead of laying off everyday people, granted, Great. You shut down USAID and National Endowments for Democracy. You know why you shut them down? Because they don't work anymore. Because the old regime change starts some protests and then make them violent and use it to overthrow the government like Maidan. It doesn't work anymore. Why do they want to get rid of Voice of America and Radio Free Liberty? Because they're not working anymore. I don't think they're getting rid of them because they're like, we don't want to do regime change anymore. No, because they don't work as effective regime change tools. And why are you wasting your money on ineffective regime change tools? That's why to get rid of them. But you want to lay a bunch of people off to save money? I don't believe that. I don't believe you're not. Look, as I've said time and again, you watch what happened. The U.S. military budget comes out. When the U.S. military budget comes out, it will increase by more than the amount that they, quote, save by firing all these federal employees. Number one. And as I said, USAID and National Endowments for Democracy, good, defund them. Great. If you can do something for the employees to, that's great. But look, those warmongering machines got to go. But the people that like all these people that work for national parks, people that work for hey, we're laying off all the national parks people. How are national parks going to work? People at the Nuclear Energy Commission. Oh, we don't need all of those. Screw it. I don't know if you need them or not, but in my opinion, they're working class people. And how many good jobs are they? What are they going to do? They ain't going to go out and get a good job like they have. The government, look, the government is going to spend this money. Don't think for 1 second that they're going to save money on the salaries of everyday working class people because they fired them. And that money is somehow going to be used for the betterment of things. They're printing more money every year than that. They're going to take that money. And meanwhile, we'll go to Mars. Oh, really? How about instead of what the hell are we going to Mars? What instead of going to Mars, some folly lark for the billionaires is to go to Mars. We're going to put people on Mars. No. How about the people on the earth here that need to eat and don't need a war? You can't get peace on the earth and you want to go to Mars. How screwed up is that? But as I continue, so we got a country that an empire that at home we got to fire our workers and throw them out into destitution because hey, that's a great thing to do and we'll save that money because we can use it for war because that's all they use it for. Hey, if they keep the people, that's a little less money they'll be able to give to the Defense Department and to the war machine. That's what I say to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon because that's where it's all going. The fraud, the richest man in the world. Yes, we're doing this to save you $1. If you wanted to save us $1, dude, why don't you get rid of those multi-billion-dollar contracts that's going into your filthy little stinking greedy pockets? This is what the MAGA people voted for. No, it's not really because Trump lied to them. Because Trump said to them, I'm going to be a peacemaker. Okay, how's that going so far? Trump said to them, I'm going to stand up for the working class. Yeah, okay. And now, of course, you know what's coming. They will increase the Pentagon budget. Trump says, yes, we're going to drop it by 8%. I bet you this. I bet you they increase it by more than 8%. The whole thing. But this is an empire. It's not about Trump. He took the wheels of an empire. If you give me a bulldozer to drive, I'm driving a bulldozer. I can't pretend like I'm driving a big wheel or a tricycle or a bicycle or a unicycle. I'm driving a bulldozer. He took the reins of a bulldozer. And what does the bulldozer do? It dozes things over like a bull. That's why they call it a bulldozer. He took the reins, he took the steering wheel of a brutal war machine. And they're going to do brutal war. That's who they are. That's what a brutal war machine does. And Trump knew it. And now, what does he do? What does he do? He is now entered. He ain't been there. He's like, I remember Trump? I was there for 4 weeks. I didn't, quote, start a war. 4 years. All the other people started a wars. Look at me. I didn't start a war. I'm the only one that didn't start a war. And then he comes back. What about now, Trump? Let's go. I missed that last time. And he's threatening Iran. I didn't start a war last time. So, hey, I got to make up for all of those wars I didn't start. Let's start with, I don't know. So let's start with 2 wars. We'll start with one that will go on forever and we'll never be able to win. And we look immoral and unjust because they're pushing back against the genocide. And it's the poorest country in the world. We'll bomb them. And of course, they're going to knock the crap out of us back. Then we'll go to Iran, a war that we're going to probably lose. Will it go nuclear? I don't know what will happen. And let's be honest, if I'm Iran, if the U.S. attacks me. Now, what have I done to you? Nothing. But if the U.S. attacks me, I'm going to build a nuclear weapon. I'm going to build a nuclear weapon if the U.S. attacks me. Why? I'm going to have one ready. If the U.S. attacks me and starts a war with me, I'm going to have a nuclear weapon prepared. And I'm going to have a conventional war. And if the U.S. one day says, okay, we're losing, let's say if the war starts and the U.S. then is getting their butt kicked. Because my prediction would be U.S. starts a war with Iran. Right. And that effectively ends Trump is saying, I'm going to end my presidency, because it would effectively end his presidency. The first thing that would happen would be the closing of the Straits of Hormuz. Right. And let me show you something. Let me show you something right now. Let's do this. It's always good to look at, when you're having a discussion, to actually look at what you're up against, right? Let's take a peep. Okay, I'm going to bring up this map and let me show you why this whole thing is important. Let's look at this map in its entirety. Okay, this is the Red Sea, right? Okay, down here we got Yemen, right? At the bottom, you see Yemen? Let's go here. Let's take a look at this, and this is important. So you got Yemen. This is the Red Sea, right? And if you look down, it's very, very skinny entrance to the, see how skinny that entrance is? The straits of, that's the Bab al-Mandab Strait, a very, very skinny little strait, which means there's not a lot of distance. There's a little island there. You see what I mean? Bab al-Mandab Straits, which means it's not easy to get through there. If Yemen don't want you to go there, not much room, they can plaster anything that goes between there, right? So they close that in, right? And now, of course, if we look here, you see China and you see Asia and all of that over here, India. So things that come from the Asian region here, right? You want to go to Europe or whatever, right? You're going to go through here. You're going to, boom, you're going to go up the Red Sea. You're going to come out, right up here is the Suez Canal, right? You're going to come out the Suez Canal. See, there's the Suez Canal. And when you come out the other side, boom, look where you are. You got the Mediterranean here, and voila, there's Europe, right? Okay, so this is a very important route, because if you don't go through there, guess what? If you're going from Asia, boop, you got to go all the way around to Africa. And that's a lot longer, a lot more expensive. I think it takes like 13 more days. And of course, that means a lot more fuel. That means it's much more expensive for things going back and forth between Asia and, Europe, especially, right? Now, let's go back to this and let's just add Iran up into this mix, right? So you've got that, you've seen that, right? This is the Gulf of Aden, right? You got to come up the Gulf of Aden. So that's one way to get to Europe, right? Okay, but there's something else, another issue. So Yemen, who's an ally of Iran, closes the Red Sea. Very dangerous place to be. Yemen can hit you with missiles. Okay, let's continue. So we've already seen that Yemen can close down the Red Sea, right? Problematic. Okay, but let's just say there was a war with Iran. Let's go to the other side, right? We're here. This is important. So we got, here's where you go to get to Europe. You go up the Red Sea and out the Suez Canal. Now let's go over here. The Straits of Hormuz. What is the Straits of Hormuz? See, there's the Gulf of Oman. This is the Straits of Hormuz that is controlled by Iran. Iran's got islands here. They got all kind of anti-shipping missiles that can mine it. They've got a huge naval presence right there. Why is that important? Well, inside the Persian Gulf, look what we got here. We got Iraq, and there's Basra, right? So we got all of this oil coming out of Iraq. We got all of this oil coming out of Kuwait. We got all of this oil coming out of Saudi Arabia, right? And what else do you have? You've got Qatar, lots of oil and gas coming out of Qatar. Oh, what else do we got? United Arab Emirates, lots of oil and gas, right? Like 30% of the world's oil and gas every day comes out of the Persian Gulf and goes through the Straits of Hormuz, right? And off it goes to the world, something like 30% of the world. And the Straits of Hormuz controlled by Iran. So you start a war with Iran. Okay, the United States can't control. Look at that. You see that? You see those two, the Red Sea on one side and the Straits of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf on the other side, right? So what we're looking at is this, two of the most important waterways in the world. The United States, let's go back here. I don't actually agree with it. I don't think it's going to work, but that is his economic plan, and he thinks it's going to work, right? He's, oh, we're going to go back to the days of whoever, the Woodrow Wilson, whoever the hell, I don't know, one of these presidents in the early 1900s, and boy, things are really going to straighten up when I go back to this, these things that worked when we were like a mostly agrarian society. I have a feeling they won't, but it doesn't matter. Trump has a plan. Dragging us into war with Yemen is going to put a hitch in that plan, little hitch in that plan, but a hitch in the plan nevertheless. But if you go to war with Iran, let's say Iran does nothing but close the Straits of Hormuz. And of course they say, well, now, you know what? We're really going to load Yemen up with weapons. We're going to arm Yemen to the friggin' teeth with weapons. For all we know, they could be armed to the teeth with weapons now, just waiting for stuff to break out. In fact, if I were Iran, I'd be loading them up. I would be arming Yemen to the friggin' teeth, saying, look, if something breaks out, you better be ready. And you know, what do you think Yemen's going to do? Oh no, we don't want to get involved in it. They are itching for a fight, dude. They're itching for it. You know, let me at them, pull the reins off. Let me go. So if I'm them, I'm loading them up, saying they can't do nothing in the Red Sea now. I'll give you even more. If I'm the Russians, I might be doing that too, to be quite frank, and the Chinese also. Not saying they are. I'm just saying if I were, I'd be considering making your friggin' life a little more miserable. Oh, you're going to give ATACMS to Ukraine, are you? Hey, we're going to provide targeting and missiles for Ukraine and drones for them to hit deep inside of Russia. If I'm Russia, I'm like, okay, I'm just saying, if something breaks off in the Red Sea, an even swap ain't no swindle, brother. An even swap ain't no swindle. I'm giving everything. I'm loading up Onyx missiles, S-300s. Oh man, the Iranians, they got a lot of stuff, but they'll have more. The Yemenis, they'll have what is it? Electronic warfare. You name it. I'm loading them and arming them to the teeth, and say, you know what? Turnaround's fair play, buddy. Have you been arming Ukraine? And now you in a fight? What do you think I'm going to do? Sitting on my hands, waiting for you to win or lose? Nope. If you're going to tip the scales against me, I'm tipping the scales against you. So if I'm the Russians and the Chinese, dude, I am loading, especially Yemen, I am loading these people up with weapons. Fire at will. Let them fly, right? If I'm Iran, this is the truth. I mean, let's be honest about it. I'm probably going to build a nuclear weapon. If the U.S. attacks me, I can have a nuclear weapon within days. I'm going to build one. I'm going to have some nuclear weapons. And at some point, first of all, what's going to happen? Nothing else happens. The first thing that's going to happen is what? They're going to close the Straits of Hormuz. 30% of the oil in the world. It's over. So, and what are the Yemen going to say? They're going to say, you know, we've said some ships could pass through. Chinese and Russian ships, you can pass through. Because that's what the Yemen always say. The rest of you, I don't care who they are. No other ships go through. So they're going to close the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. That's done. Both sides, as I've shown you, the Persian Gulf on one side, Red Sea on the other. What's going to happen? Iran's going to close the Straits of Hormuz and close the Persian Gulf, and 30% of the world's oil stops flowing. How do you think that'll affect the United States economy, the Western economy, and all the rest of the economies. Now, interestingly enough, who will benefit? Cui bono, Sonny Bono, I don't know, whatever, Bono. Who benefits? Russia sells a little bit of oil, don't they? Russian oil ain't going to be slowed up. And by the way, do you think if a Russian oil tanker goes through the Red Sea or wants to go through the Straits or wherever it wants to go, guess what? You think the Houthis are going to be firing at Russian oil tankers? No, they'll say Russian oil tankers, you can go through all you want. Now, the rest of you sons of bitches, we got a hypersonic missile for you if you try to go through. So what happens if 30% of the oil, almost pretty much, let's just say a third of the world's oil supply dries up like that? Number one is the Russians make a fortune. The price of oil goes to $400 a barrel, and the Russians got plenty of oil, and they're selling it like, and everybody's screaming to the Russians, please, can I get some oil? So for starters, the Russians will make money like nobody in this world has ever made money on oil. Yeah, the U.S. will make some money on oil, but they'll have problems because, number one, internally, people will be saying, why is gas now $15 a gallon? And I thought eggs and things were expensive now. If diesel fuel is $18 a gallon, let's just say this, and everything you buy in the market, everything you buy everywhere, you go to the grocery store, everything is brought there by trucks that have burned diesel fuel, and they're now paying $18 a gallon. You know what? There's a term for that: depression. It'll make 1929 look like a sudden, just a bubble. Now, that's best case scenario. Let's go one further. Iran starts hitting U.S. bases and sinking U.S. ships. And Iran says, you know what? Tell you what I'm going to do. And the U.S., well, we'll hit you with this, that, and the other. And Iran says, we are going to destroy everything. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, all of the oil infrastructure is going to catch a hypersonic missile. We're going to wipe out, first of all, effectively, to some extent, when they shut off the Persian Gulf, they're going to get rid of a lot of it, but maybe there's some pipelines, some other ways you can get it off overland, not enough to make a difference. But if the U.S. gets too froggy and hits Iran too hard, what is Iran going to do? They'll say, they've already said that. They said, we'll flatten all the oil infrastructure in the Gulf and we will nuke your economy. So now, guess what? Donald Trump is 4 months in, and his country is in the greatest depression that it has ever seen in its history. Ever. And there ain't no way out. 4 months in, Mr. Make America Great Again, the peacemaker, has dragged us into wars that have obliterated the economy, to use a Donald Trump. Now, let me say this also. Let me add this. Donald Trump said recently, hey, Iran better do this, or I'm giving them 2 months. If they don't do it within 2 months, then I'm going to take them out, and then they're going to find out, and they're going to be held accountable and all this crap. Now, a lot of people flipped out, and I had to do this to talk about that, but I got to add this to it. In the same way that 1 week Donald Trump says, hey, Zelensky's a dictator, and a week later they're like, didn't you call Zelensky a dictator? He's like, I don't remember calling him a dictator. What, a dictator? Nah, you can use word that. Come on, you know, I mean, green suit wearing guy, but I mean, dictator, nah. So Donald Trump this week is, Iran better do this or else they're gonna get it. We're gonna hold them accountable, blah, 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 blah. A week from now, Donald Trump will be like, what? They're going to be like, well, you said you were going to attack Iran. He'll be like, attack Iran? Me? I don't recall saying attacking Iran. No, come on, that would wake by their gun. Nah, attack Iran? Who do that? What kind of lunatic would do that? I don't recall. It will not shock me if a week from now, Donald Trump doesn't not only say he's not going to attack Iran, deny that he ever said it in the first place. What isn't it interesting? I mean, think about this guy. A couple of weeks ago, he says, I'm talking to the Russians and they're going to help me get a deal with Iran. Well, you can't get a deal with the Russians, but they're going to help you get a deal. Well, at least you get a deal with somebody, right? And then we can't get a deal with the Russians, but they're going to help us get a deal with Iran. And then we're going to give Iran an ultimatum. You better take the deal that we give you, or and negotiate with us within 2 months, or we're going to attack you. Well, wait a minute. That's not a negotiation, is it? Is it a negotiation to say, if you don't take the deal that I give you within 2 months, I'll kill you? That's not negotiating. It's like armed robbery. I got a gun on you. The problem, again, this is when you bluff like that, you got to be able to back it up. And if the person knows you can't back it up, they're going to punch your ticket. Like the Western Europeans, Putin better do what we tell him to do, or we're going to send in troops. And Putin's like, yeah, really. I'm horribly frightened of that threat, that there's going to be a bunch of troops coming from Europe and England. I mean, I can count the troops on one hand that England can send, and still have enough fingers left to make a fist. Get out of here, England. You're bluffing. I can see you're bluffing. The world knows you're bluffing. Don't bluff. As they say, don't bluff Beijing and don't march on Moscow. Isn't that what international geopolitics say historically? So they're bluffing Putin, and he's like yawning. Sure. Okay. Yeah. Oh boy. The Brits are going to send their mighty army. Oh, well, we're scared of that, but we ain't giving you what you want. All right. You're going to send your mighty army, Britain. I don't know how they're going to get here. Your ships don't work. Maybe they'll take a train. Maybe they'll just take, I don't know, a commercial aircraft. They can buy a ticket like anybody else and get off in Kyiv. So I guess that's the way the Brits are going to, like, their air force is pretty much null and void. Their ships don't work. I guess they'll catch commercial aircraft. They'll send you know, as small as their military is, they won't need to buy a lot of tickets to send them. You know, there'll be like a small crowd. It'll look like a small gathering in Kyiv as they get together to go die on the front lines. So whatever the case may be, my point being the same. It's a bluff, and everybody knows it's a bluff. When it comes to attacking Iran, it better be a bluff. It better be a bluff. It has to be a bluff. And with Trump, it wouldn't surprise me. But because you can't defeat Yemen. You lost to Afghanistan. You got your butt kicked by a half-assed group of guys who really, they got toughness. You know what they got? They're tougher than you are. That's all they got. They're short on weapons. They're short on a lot, but they're strong on heart. That's what these people got. And you lost to people just because they were tougher. You outgunned them for all you were worth. But in the end, you went to their house to fight, and they sent you home limping. And now you've gone to the Red Sea and you're sending more people. They're going to send you home limping. If you look, if you put ships in the range of the Houthis, they will try their damnedest, bestest to sink them. And what happens if they do that? What are you going to do? How are you going to, where do you take it? Oh, we're going to attack the poorest country in the world. How bad does it look? So what are you going to do? You're going to up the attacks? They ain't ever stopping. And now what have you done? Are you going to put troops on the ground? Well, they sunk a ship. We're going to put troops on the ground. And Yemen's going to jump up and sing, finally, hooray, we get to fight them. And you know what? There'll probably be Muslims all over the Middle East saying, thank God the Yankees are finally on the ground and they're ready to fight. They'll be all trying to go to Yemen so they can pick up a gun, a rock, a stick, anything they can. They'll say the time has come that we can finally have jihad on the ground against these sons of bitches. And we're going to get our get backs now. Do you really want to put troops on the ground there? What are you going to do? So you're in a bad situation there. Now, you got Iran. I've already been over that. To start a war with Iran, Iran has missiles everywhere. And what I heard Alistair Crook talk about this one time, and Alistair Crook knows his stuff. And Alistair Crook said, look, in the mountains, in places all over the place, throughout the mountains in various places, the Iranians have missile sites that are deep in the mountains, and there's lots of them, and they're spread all over the place, and you can never stop them or get them all. And these mountains these people are remote, and they have remote access to channels of communication, and they have their assignments. And what is their assignment? If in fact at some times the Americans or the Israelis, say the Israelis throw some nukes at Tehran and kill all the leaders and kill everybody, and they nuke Iran, the plan for these various sites out in the mountains who have literally hundreds of thousands of large ballistic missiles is to start throwing them in Israel. And if they start throwing them at Israel, you know they're going to start throwing them at every U.S. base. They're going to start throwing them at every U.S. At the infrastructure. And their plan is don't stop throwing them at Israel until you run out. And this could go on for months, if not years. And there's nothing you can do. So what are you going to do? Now, let me ask you this. If Israel or the U.S. threw some nukes, and we know that the only reason Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons is because they don't want them. Don't you think if you threw a nuclear weapon at Iran, that they would probably quickly assemble one and throw one back at you? At least one. At that point, what do they have to lose? You've gone all out. We're going to destroy Iran. At that point, once you fire a nuke at them, you've got a problem. Because what happens now is there going to be nuclear fallout all over the Middle East, and nobody's ever going to be able to oil out of there. Maybe after 25,000 years, we can do that. You're going to turn the oil fields into Chernobyl. At that point, again, here's my point. Here's my point, Donald Trump. How's your presidency looking, bro? How's your empire looking, brother? How's your plan to go confront China, to add the Canada and whatever the hell else, and to put tariffs on people? How's all that looking there? It's all gone. All up in smoke. If Donald Trump is stupid enough he's riding this empire. If he's stupid enough to ride this empire drag it into a war with Yemen, he's taking it down the road of destruction. And, here's the bottom line. Forget Trump, because Biden was taking us down the road of destruction just the same way. I suspect that if Kamala had went in, the same thing they were looking for, we'd have gotten nuked with it. I'll put it like this. I don't think we'd make it to August. I don't think we'd make it till fall. If Kamala had won, I literally don't think we could make it till fall. I think that the neocons had decided that they were going to up the ante against Russia and who knows what. And before you know it, nukes would have started flying and we'd all been dead we wouldn't make it probably before June, July, August, we'd all been dead if Kamala wins, right? No doubt, my question in my mind. So now Trump is in. And I said this before Trump went in. I said, here's the difference between Trump. He's a different kind of neocon. The thing about Trump is this. The Biden neocons were crazy. They wanted to fight with the biggest people they could get. They wanted a fight with Russia and China, and they didn't care if it went nuclear. They just wanted to fight because they were insane sociopaths, right? Trump doesn't want to fight with Russia and China because he's like, they're too powerful. We can't fight them, and we'd lose, and it'd go nuclear. It'd be World War III. We'd all die. But he wants to beat the hell out of the little ones. That's the difference in Trump. Trump doesn't want a big fight, but he doesn't have trouble getting involved in all of these little ones all over the place. And so now Trump, 8 weeks in, has started his first war. He is officially a president. He's officially the people of the empire, the neocons and the imperial blob is like, well, we got Trump where we need him to be. All of this business about I'm the only one that's in the start of war is out the window. And so, as far as I'm concerned, the U.S. empire, in the same way that the Brits and the French, etc., collapsed their empire in the Suez Canal, which is off what? The Red Sea, right? The Gulf of Suez to the Red Sea to the Suez. I mean, the Red Sea to the Gulf of Suez and into the Suez Canal and out into the Mediterranean, right? The same, isn't it interesting that the same area of the world, to me, is ending the U.S. empire? It's dying in the same place by trying. And what are they saying? The Suez Canal was about what? It's always with empire controlling the international shipping lanes, right? So you can control international shipping because it's always about money. The U.S., what do they say? We've got the Red Sea. It's about navigation, freedom of navigation. What is it? It's not about freedom of navigation. It's about the U.S. the U.S. empire being able to control the lanes of navigation around the world. One of the things that you got to understand here is the Houthis have done something to disgrace the United States. The U.S. military, its Navy, is supposed to be able to control the shipping lanes around the world. That we can tell you, ultimately, we can block off your shipping lanes if we choose, or we can keep them open if we choose. Either one. We can block them off, and nobody can block them off but us. What the Houthis have done is disgrace the United States by showing that a country with an advantageous geographical position and with current available technology can defeat the US in its quest to control the shipping lanes. See, the big humiliation here is they have revealed a weakness in the US empire, a chink in their armor, as people say. Because the US empire, what is this Navy about? Two things. We can shut down any important shipping lane if we want, but we can keep any important shipping lane open. Well, you know what? We're half there now. Yeah, maybe we can cut some off. I don't even know about that anymore. But one damn thing for sure, it's obvious we can't keep one open. It's obvious that if even a poor country with an advantageous geographical position sitting right there at the Bab el-Mandab Strait at the mouth of the Red Sea can say nobody comes in this Red Sea unless we say they come in. They have challenged the power of the empire, effectively challenged the power of the empire, right? And the empire has to demonstrate, no, we still rule the seas, except we don't. And guess what? Here's what I keep saying about the empire. I'm going to finish up here. What we keep finding about the empire is everything that it does to try to save itself, to try to reestablish itself, everything that it does only makes it crumble faster. And the things that it's doing, the horrific moral acts that it is doing in Gaza are causing the US empire to crumble. As the buildings crumble in the rubble of Gaza, the US empire crumbles in the rubble of Gaza. Everything the US is doing in the Red Sea to try to demonstrate our dominance is demonstrating that we don't have dominance. So the US empire is drowning in the Red Sea. It's crumbling in the ruins of Gaza and drowning in the Red Sea, the same area that took down the Brits. One could argue the French, but the Brits for sure. US is in the same vicinity and is getting the same treatment. And right now, there's no way out for Trump. See, he trapped himself. He picked a fight that he can't possibly win. He picked a fight with Yemen, and he's like, I'm not going to say, well, they're not going to stop, and they're going to keep fighting. So what are you going to do, Donald Trump? You're going to be in office now for, you barely started your 4 years. So you got your whole 2 weeks, you got your whole 4 years. Are you going to be at war with Yemen for 4 straight years? Because Yemen's willing to fight that. It's going to be very, very expensive to do that. And what happens when you're going to send all these targets and Yemen's going to hit them? And then what? And then what? Can you just walk away from a loss? This is boneheaded, but this ain't Trump. It ain't just Trump. This is the U.S. empire. This is what empires do. What, when the Brits and had their Suez crisis, was that? Can people name who was in charge then and who's made that mistake? A lot of people don't know who was in charge at that point. They just know that that was the British Empire doing what empires do, where they do them, diet in Suez. And years from now, people won't necessarily blame it on Trump. They'll look at what the U.S. empire has been doing since, say, 2000, since 1991, when the Soviet Union fell, and they will see, wow, look at the empire was going down, 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 down. Obama, Clinton, you name them, they just kept going down, 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 and they will see the deterioration of the empire until it finally hit rock bottom. And they'll remember who was president when that happened. Who was president in 2008? I don't remember. Who was president when this happened? They may remember the last one, but they'll look at it and they'll say, yeah, every president was the president of the U.S. empire, and they were heading downhill. So let's keep a watch. Thanks a lot, everybody. Numero uno. Follow me
The new week began with numerous reports of another Russian army's major success in key directions of the front. In particular, war correspondents confirmed that on Monday, March 24th, Russian troops almost completely liberated the settlement of Lobkovoy in the Zaporizhia direction of the front. According to them, the Russian army currently controls 70% of this settlement territory. A member of the Civic Chamber of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Rogov, also confirmed this information. According to him, the assault units of the group of troops under the designation Dnepr almost completely knocked out the Ukrainian army units from this settlement. At the same time, he expressed confidence that the complete liberation of Lobkovoy could take place in the coming hours. Over the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian army's position has also worsened markedly in Chasiv Yar. According to war correspondents, Russian troops almost completely liberated this city. Reports indicate that as of March 25, 2025, the Ukrainian army controls only a few five-story buildings in Chasiv Yar. Ukrainian war correspondent Yuri Butasov also confirmed the Russian army's successes in this city. According to him, the Russians managed to break into the city center, where they are currently engaged in fierce battles with units of the 28th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade of the Ukrainian Army. At the same time, this Ukrainian war correspondent noted that Russian troops used so-called smokescreen tactics to break into the city center. As a result, Ukrainian drones and artillery systems have lost their sight and become helpless. Numerous American and European think tanks also confirmed the plight of the Ukrainian army in Chasiv Yar. According to them, Russian paratroopers have completely displaced the Ukrainian army units from the Zapadny microdistrict and have made significant progress in the Shevchenko microdistrict. All this indicates that Russian troops are in the center of Chasiv Yar, where Ukrainian units attempt to maintain control over a small area in a residential part of the city. It is noteworthy that numerous Russian sources, including influential Telegram channels, also confirmed this information. In the Belgorod region, the Ukrainian army also suffered a crushing defeat. Unfortunately for the Kiev regime, the Ukrainian army was unable to capture at least one settlement in the Belgorod region before the start of negotiations with the American delegation in Saudi Arabia. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that after the crushing defeat in the Kursk region, the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, ordered the seizure of border settlements in the Belgorod region, so that the Ukrainian delegation would have a new bargaining chip during negotiations with the Americans. However, unfortunately for this political clown, the Russian troops managed to completely stop the Ukrainian army units near the settlement of Demidovka. In the last 24 hours alone, the Ukrainian army has lost 800 soldiers and 20 pieces of heavy equipment in the Belgorod region. As a result, the Ukrainian delegation failed to use the Belgorod region as a bargaining chip during negotiations with the Americans in Saudi Arabia. Journalists note that the Ukrainian delegation was in a pretty bad mood after talks with the Americans. Moreover, the deputy head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Pavel Polisa, even refused to communicate with reporters. All this indicates that Ukraine has suffered a crushing defeat not only on the battlefield, but also at the negotiating table. Meanwhile, the so-called European leaders still struggle to accept that they have permanently lost the wealthiest regions of Ukraine, where they have invested large sums of money for the past 10 years, believing that Ukraine had irrevocably entered the sphere of influence of the West. In particular, French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer continue to make provocative statements regarding the dispatch of British and French troops to Ukraine. Against this backdrop, I would like to note another provocative statement by the French President, Emmanuel Macron, which he made on the morning of March 23 during a conversation with journalists. So, answering journalists' questions, Emmanuel Macron confirmed that Paris is developing a plan to send French troops to Odessa in order to protect maritime transport infrastructure facilities. In simple terms, France intends to occupy Odessa to profit from operating Ukraine's largest port. Reports suggest that France is contemplating the deployment to Odessa of units comprised of troops withdrawn from African countries.
They're gonna get killed.
Moreover, it became known that Britain plans to do the same concerning the port of Ochakiv, Nikolaev region.
They're gonna get killed.
London is seriously planning to occupy the city of Ochakiv so that the Russians do not gain control of one of the largest ports in Ukraine. Russia's reaction to such provocative statements by European leaders was not long in coming. So, on the night of March 24th, the Russian aerospace forces, together with the missile units, launched another combined missile attack on the military installations of the Ukrainian army and NATO forces.
Already got killed.
This time, Russian missiles and kamikaze drones rained down on the Kiev region. In particular, powerful explosions were recorded in cities such as Vyshgorod and Brovary. So, in the southern part of the city of Vyshgorod, Russian missiles hit the building of a local dormitory. As it turned out, the Ukrainian General Staff and its NATO military advisors used this building as a place for the temporary deployment of Ukrainian and French officers. It is reported that these French officers were mine layers. In the northern part of the city of Brovary, a Russian Iskander-M ballistic missile struck the building of the local public library. Later, the coordinator of the Nikolaev Underground, Sergei Lebedev, confirmed that British military instructors were stationed in this building. Unfortunately, as of March 25, there is still no accurate data regarding casualties among French and British officers. However, witnesses claim that there are a large number of ambulances near the destroyed buildings. This suggests that the casualties among the British and French military could be in the range of a few dozen individuals. Undoubtedly, this missile attack was another Russia's warning. Russia has made it clear to Britain and France that Moscow is not going to hand over the Odessa and Nikolaev regions to the European globalists.
We start with breaking news. Russia and the United States of America are holding talks in Riyadh. The parties took 2 lunch breaks and resumed communication. This meeting was held behind closed doors. The Russian delegation, according to the Ukrainians, is headed by diplomatic wolfhounds. This is Senator Grigory Karasin, who is called Mr. KGB in Kiev, and advisor to the director of the FSB, Sergei Beseda. Previously, he headed the 5th Directorate of the FSB, which was responsible for the Ukrainian direction. The main issue today is the Black Sea deal. The Telegraph specifies that the talks are devoted to the safety of shipping and the end of attacks on ports. The Guardian writes that the Ukrainian delegation remains in Riyadh and is waiting for the end of the meeting between Moscow and Washington, so that, if Washington demands it, they can meet again. The Ukrainians themselves, as always, are dressed in the usual military style, as if they had just come from the trenches, although the head of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense Umarov and the head of the delegation did not appear at the front. Everything that is known at this minute. The United States agrees to Russia's conditions. Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions are going to Moscow, and Kiev is abandoning NATO. Well, that is, to put it simply, after huge losses, the Ukrainians returned to the conditions of Istanbul 2022, having lost the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions to Russia. Exactly at 10 o'clock in the morning of Moscow time, the Russian delegation, the head of the International Committee of the Federation Council, former Deputy Foreign Minister Karasin and advisor to the FSB Director Besida appear at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. The meeting is closed to journalists. The only footage of Russian diplomats was published from the lobby. Filming had to be done secretly. The negotiators are closely accompanied by organizers in national dress, headscarves, and tunics. The most important issue for discussion is the Black Sea deal, which the Ukrainians already disrupted in 2022. At that time, wheat began to explode suspiciously in dry cargo ships, and it became known that it was not food, but weapons inside.
We proceed from the fact that today the issue of the Black Sea Initiative and all aspects related to the resumption of this initiative is on the agenda. This was President Trump's proposal. And President Putin agreed to this. It was with this mandate that our delegation went to Riyadh. This is primarily about shipping safety. But if you remember this deal in its previous form, it contained a fairly large part of the obligations to our country, which, by the way, were not fulfilled last time.
The composition of the Russian delegation caused shock in Kiev. The head of Ukrainian intelligence, Budanov, calls the FSB Colonel General the most dangerous adversary and personal enemy.
They have one person at the level of the special services. Very problematic for us. This is Mr. General Besida. He is a very problematic person. He has done a lot of evil for Ukraine. Now he is doing his job. Unfortunately, not in favor of Ukraine. He continues to work, and he continues to be a very serious enemy. He is an adversary and enemy of our state.
With Karasin, things are even worse. Former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko was personally acquainted with him even before the Maidan. He is taken aback even by the initials of Lavrov's former deputy. Karasin Grigory Borisovich, abbreviated as KGB.
I have had the experience of very difficult work with Mr. Karasin since 2009, who was then called Mr. KGB in our foreign ministry and around the world. These are the first letters of his last name and patronymic. I also know very well the principles of work of Mr. Besida, the head of the former 5th Directorate of the FSB. This directorate works on Ukraine, right? Absolutely right. And they are very well informed about the situation in Ukraine. Well, Karasin is such a diplomatic wolfhound. And we should have the same wolfhounds in our delegation, but they are not there.
The delegation from Washington is headed by Michael Anton, whom the U.S. President appointed to the post of Director of Policy Planning in the State Department. He is the Chief Foreign Policy Strategist. The second negotiator is Andrew Peake, a senior director at the White House National Security Council. He is also Donald Trump's personal choice.
The Russian negotiators will meet with the American side in Saudi Arabia on Monday, but will not meet face-to-face with the Ukrainian delegation. The Russian and Ukrainian teams will be located in separate rooms for now, and only the American negotiators will move around. 3 teams from the United States plan to coordinate this process. The Americans will have separate conversations with the negotiators from each country. We are closer to peace than ever before. It started with President Trump talking to both leaders one-on-one. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and I have engaged the Russians and Ukrainians at our level. And now we actually have technical teams of Ukrainians and Russians conducting indirect negotiations on the same platform. Now we will talk about a ceasefire in the Black Sea so that both sides can transport grain, fuel, and resume trade. Of course, we will also discuss the demarcation line.
Trump's friend and envoy Steve Witkoff, who has spoken to Putin twice, said that the new borders of Ukraine have already been effectively drawn. Witkoff also verified for the first time the referendums in the new territories as a legitimate right of the people.
Speaking about these 5 regions that have become part of Russia, Russia considers these territories its own. Referendums have been held there, and these events have been confirmed. I have never seen a conflict that could be resolved without establishing the facts, and we have established them. I do not see Putin wanting to seize territory in Europe. The situation today is very different from what it was during World War II. There was no NATO then, and now all countries are armed. As for me, in this sense, I take Putin at his word, and the countries of Europe are starting to understand this.
Witkoff also told a very personal story about Trump and Putin. The Russian president prayed for his health when Trump survived an assassination attempt and was wounded by a sniper.
When our president was shot, Putin went to a local church, met with a priest, and prayed for Trump. Not because he was the president of the United States. He could have become the president of the United States. But because they were friends, and he was praying for his friend. Can you imagine sitting there and listening to that kind of talk? And I went home. I passed that message on to our president, and he was clearly touched by it.
The nuances of the negotiations were voiced by Special Envoy Keith Kellogg, a shuttle diplomacy in 2 stages. First, the U.S. team received Ukraine's demands. Then the Americans passed Kiev's position onto representatives from Moscow.
Russia views the negotiations with Trump as a separate area, unrelated to Ukraine. As for Kiev itself, Putin shows no signs of abandoning his main goals, guarantees that Ukraine will never join NATO, limitations on the Ukrainian armed forces, and the presence of a certain level of influence on Ukraine's domestic politics. The Kremlin is determined to get as much benefit as possible from Trump's desire for a peace deal in Ukraine, even if it slows down the negotiations. From Moscow's perspective, improving relations with Washington is an economic and geopolitical boon that can be achieved even if Russian missiles continue to pound Ukraine.
Just 90 minutes later, a technical delegation from Ukraine is hurriedly leaving the luxurious lobby of the Ritz-Carlton. The Kiev negotiators are dressed in identical swamp-colored sweaters. According to the British Times, Kiev is demanding comprehensive military monitoring from satellites during the truce. Bloomberg reports the likely date of the truce. It is the date of Easter. In 2025, Orthodox and Catholic holidays coincide.
The United States wants to achieve a truce in Ukraine by April 20th. The choice of date is due to the fact that this year, April 20th is Easter in both Orthodox and Western churches. However, the planned dates for the truce may be shifted due to the large gap between the positions of the parties. Sources claim that the United States has not yet agreed to Russia's demands to stop supplying weapons to Ukraine. At the same time, European officials fear that Donald Trump may sacrifice Kiev's interests for the sake of a diplomatic triumph.
Member of the Ukrainian Rada Dubinsky reports from the pretrial detention center that all the terms of the deal have already been agreed upon. The delegation from Kiev came to Riyadh only to put a tick, where the negotiators from Washington indicate. Zelensky asks to put pressure not on himself, but on Putin.
This is already the second meeting of the Ukrainian and American teams in Saudi Arabia. This time this meeting is more technical. Our military, our diplomats, our representatives of the Ministry of Energy came there. The conversation was quite useful. The work of the delegations continues. But whatever we talk about with our partners now, we need to put the squeeze on Putin.
If we believe the Telegraph newspaper, Trump is unhappy with Zelensky again. Kiev has not stopped hitting Russian energy infrastructure facilities. CNN admires the Russian president's skills, honed to perfection in the intelligence school of the Soviet KGB. Putin, as it seems to them, is playing with Trump. Now shock content. Time magazine has put Zelensky on the cover again, but for the first time under the headline, "The End of the Game." The author of this article is the so-called biographer and chronicler of Zelensky, Simon Schuster, who glorified Zelensky at the beginning of the war, and the magazine covers can essentially trace the evolution. In May 2022, Schuster published an enthusiastic text about the leadership of the Ukrainian president. In November 2023, he published an article about how not everyone in Zelensky's entourage seemed to believe in victory, and then a huge scandal occurred. In the current issue, Schuster writes that Ukraine must abandon all goals, otherwise there will be nothing left of Ukraine.
And there has been a statement, presumably, arranged and agreed upon by Zelensky himself, I would guess. But a member of the Kiev regime's parliament, the Rada, has come out and openly decried Witkoff, right? Trump's
they say he was Putin. He was working with Putin. They say
he's a Russian agent, and he's spreading Russian disinformation, and that Kiev is demanding his withdrawal. Now, it must be said that it's very interesting that Trump is using him, right? Witkoff. He's already the go-to Trump envoy for the Middle East.
By the way, I like Witkoff, and you could tell me. I think he's a straight shooter, which is what I like.
He is a slimy New York real estate developer with no experience in diplomacy, particular knowledge of foreign affairs, of the conflict in Ukraine or the Middle East or anything else. His number one quality is that he's charming like a used car salesman and that he is personally loyal to Trump. Now, but that's aside. Like, I'm going to put that to the side. Right? I know there's some people that are trying to talk him up and saying that he's a great diplomat, and he reminds them of, I heard an analyst whose name I'm not going to mention say that he reminds them of Kissinger. I'm like, really? Okay, I'm going to leave that on the floor. But what is important to me about his selection and extensive use by Trump is that he doesn't trust the blob at all, right? Right. He is not from the U.S. foreign policy and security establishment, right? This has been one of the things that I've argued, like, where does Trump find the people who politically, particularly on foreign policy issues, either agree with him or at least willing to go along with what he says, while the entire blob, the entire U.S. foreign policy and security establishment is steeped in what amounts to an exceptionalist ideology committed to American hegemony, right? Not on the terms that Trump interprets, right? Trump is reinterpreting U.S. foreign policy, right? Not in a good way, right? I mean, maybe good for one particular area, like it might work out to Russia's advantage. Maybe we'll see. That's undetermined yet. The Palestinians and Iranians are probably going to end up on the short end of the stick, right? But he is reprioritizing foreign policy instead of what he sees as a wasteful, expensive pursuit of hegemony that is too costful to the U.S. He wants to be the first great power among three great powers competing for influence and geopolitics in the world. And he basically claims the Western Hemisphere is his. His most recent statements that any country that dares conduct oil trade with Venezuela will suffer 25% tariffs is saying that, right? I mean, that I don't know how that's going to work, all right? But we don't know. But those kinds of make clear what Trump's intentions are. So, like I said, yes, it's different. It is a radical reinterpretation, but it is still an American first, old school imperialism school of U.S. foreign policy that doesn't make it good. Don't think that by trading Pepsi out for Coke that there's now a good guy in the White House. There's a guy who is doing things different, but it is still an imperial American first agenda. Even if it's the transition will inevitably result in a lot of chaos bomb, right? And a lot of danger, to the U.S. position, right? Because it's weakening things as it's attempting to rebuild them in different directions. But it is an indication that Trump doesn't trust anyone. And that's how he's getting around, right? He's just not relying for what he considers to be his most important foreign policy negotiations on anyone from the blob because he doesn't trust them.
As he should.
He's going to a loyal personal friend who has no experience in what he's doing whatsoever, which is true. Right?
That is true. But at the very least, it's go and affect my will in a way that I think you'd affect my will, as opposed to a Rubio where you may not actually trust, because this is not really Rubio's position.
I'm not criticizing it.
Yeah.
In ultimate terms, I'm pointing out that there are negative things, but I'm saying it's extremely interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So the Kiev regime side is demanding that Witkoff must go. Right. That he's a Russian propagandist, that he's a Russian agent, and boy, do they not know how to deal with the Trump administration, because this is just going to piss Trump off. Right. I mean, this is literally going to piss Trump off because Witkoff is his good, personal, loyal. What exactly is it that a mafia don calls his sergeants sent out into the field? Because that's
lieutenant, like he's a good lieutenant.
Yeah, that's effectively what he is, right? Secondly, and part of Zelensky is decrying outright that there are people, right, totally not looking at you, JD Vance and Witkoff and others, that are under Russian influence, right? Which means not under our influence within the Trump administration. And Zelensky is warning about this. And here, this is the kicker. He said that one of the disinformation that is being fed to Trump is that he doesn't want peace, right? But he's always wanted peace now, suddenly, according to this is what Zelensky, who was decrying, had to be, with a cutoff of military intelligence aid, at least theoretically, for a couple of days, right? That was what had to twist his arm behind his back, break his knees, whatever, to make him agree to even, cease fire. Yeah, all right. So So it's all lies that Zelensky doesn't want peace. But I guess in order to prove that, Zelensky did a photo op with Time magazine, right? That came out over this weekend, right? He's on the cover, but more importantly, inside, yes. So he's on the cover with a title that shows Zelensky in another heroic pose, but this time it says "End Game." Right, but inside the article there are other pictures that obviously Zelensky wanted staged and taken. He took right outside his office. He now has 2 paintings, right? And there's a third one that he mentioned that is in his bedroom, right? That wasn't shown in the photo op. But Zelensky, right, in this photo for Time magazine, standing in between 2 paintings. One is a picture of Ukrainian troops heroically invading Russia in the Kursk region. And the other one is of the Kremlin in flames in Moscow. The third one, which he didn't show, but he told us is in his bedroom, is of a Russian warship being sunk. And he said, "This is where I live." Right? This is where I live. But, right, it's Russian disinformation that I don't want peace, right? So just so you understand where this whole thing is going, this is why the ceasefire on energy infrastructure is already a wash, that Russia is simply continuing to follow despite multiple attacks on their energy infrastructure. And this is just meant as a bone to Trump, or to play along to Trump, whatever, and it's pissing a lot of people off in the generals and other people in Russia, it must be said. This grain sea, this renewed Black Sea initiative, this grain initiative 3.0 or whatever you want to call it, is grinding to nothing before anything is agreed upon.
To be fair,
there's no matter what Trump and Putin, or Trump and Putin's people, even if they eventually agree on things, still they have to get their proxy to play along, and their proxy, with full support from the Europeans, is not playing along.
The energy attacks are an FU to Trump for this deal, and that they are exactly an FU to Trump. The moment that Putin gave the order, Zelensky said, "Okay, yeah, I give the order too." So both of them agreed upon this relatively quickly. And then Zelensky, I would imagine, said F you to Trump, who I would imagine he hates, he doesn't like you say, he doesn't necessarily know how to deal with him because Donald Trump wants to end the war in a way that Zelensky doesn't. But on the other side of it, though, they didn't come to a grain deal after 12 hours of talks. So I would imagine
to think that they could come to a deal for something as complicated as inspections of commercial shipping and the like in the Black Sea, right? Which Russia would absolutely, because this is what happened last time, is that the commercial ships were used to transport, grain ships were used to transport arms, from NATO, including from the US, right, into Odessa, right, into the Kiev regime's ports on the Black Sea. And Russia's saying, if we're going to resurrect this thing, then there needs to be real inspections, and there would demand a much more stringent regime. Now, another thing
real quick, I'm just pointing out that the fact that they didn't come to that deal is evidence that Putin is aware that Ukraine is violating it, knows they're violating it, and is taking it out on some level like, dude, you're not even living up to the agreement, this limited agreement that we made. How are you now saying, let's have this larger grain deal that you've already violated twice?
Yeah, and in the previous time, the Kiev regime, of course, was conducting attacks on Russian ships and ports with their drones, somewhat effectively, it must be said, right? Because drones, surface drones, they're a major threat to ships at sea, right? It's a new form of naval warfare. And right now, the truth is that there's actually a lot of trade being conducted through the Black Sea, right? Regular ships go in and out of Odessa and other Ukrainian ports, right? That's happening on a daily basis. It's not like there's no grain going out or anything like this now. Russia occasionally identifies a ship that for sure has military supplies on it and takes it out, right? Or hits the port when it's unloading or something like that. But for the most part, they're still getting lots of stuff through because it is always more efficient, right? It is always much easier to ship things in quantity like vehicles and artillery shells and bombs and the like by ship, by trade, than it is to transport them by train, switching to train and whatever. So that's going on, right? So and simply on those terms, there's not a great deal of desire on the Kiev regime side for this, right? They're already conducting plenty of trade, right? Yeah, they take some hits, but they're happy with that, right? The Russian Navy is, for the most part, other than its submarines, bottled up away from Ukrainian shores because it would be a waste, right? There's too much potential attacks on them from drones, right? What can Russia hit back? The Kiev regime doesn't have a navy anymore, right? So, it would be pointless to put their own ships at risk to drones that have brought down ships or conducted serious damage on them before. So they're happy. In fact, Bulgaria and Romania have come out and they're extremely unhappy with these negotiations. Again, Europeans, right? NATO members, because they don't want any change to the status quo. They're happy with the status quo, which means they're both getting enough trade and military supplies into the Kiev regime under current conditions. They don't want to risk anything that would extend, as they see it, potentially extend Russian naval influence in the Black Sea by making the Kiev regime. One of the things that the Kiev regime is doing in order to conduct some of its long-range attacks on Russia energy infrastructure and like on Engels Air Force Base is they're using their surface drones as mini aircraft carriers for drones.
Yeah,
they're not using them right now for attacks on Russian ships because the Russian ships are all basically hiding, right, in ports close to Russia. So what they're doing is they've modified their surface drones to carry other drones, right? They They're very hard to detect. They just trundle across the Black Sea and launch their drones, their long-range drones, right off of Russia's coast on the other side of the Black Sea. And they're getting some success with it, right?
Yeah.
Even if a majority of those drones are then brought down by Russian air defense, then still some of them are going to get through, right? And that alone for them is worth it right now. And which is why they're not crazy either about the any attack stopping of attacks on energy infrastructure or any Black Sea deal. They don't want it. And it's going to be very hard to make them agree to it. Right? Even if rhetorically they say, oh, it's just Russia attacking themselves. We had nothing to do with it.
I know. I guess at some point, Trump is going to have to put screws to Europe, and he's going to have to put screws to Zelensky. Like, they're doing everything in their power to kill any notion of negotiations. And I have to imagine that Russia is looking at this saying, dude, your dog is peeing on my yard.
Yeah.
Like, meaning whatever we are negotiating for 12 hours, at the end of the day, Ukraine is going rogue. They're blowing up stuff that we agreed upon that they weren't supposed to blow up. Why are we going to agree to a deal when you can't even get this under control? That has to be part of the conversation.
Is that Russia knows that these will go nowhere, that there is no chance, even if they can come to agreements with the Trump administration, that this will ever become effective because of the opposition by the Kiev regime and the Europeans. They are going along with the process to try to salvage an improvement in bilateral relations with the Trump administration out of this. That is what they're doing. And as far as the Russian are concerned, let's be honest. What Trump is doing is saving a U.S. proxy regime in Kiev, a Banderite fascist proxy regime. Because if any peace deal was actually reached, that is the only thing that can save that regime from Russia at this point. Because Russia would, in a span of a year or 2 years or 3 years, right, even with continued U.S. and European aid, bring this regime down in Kiev. And that is the only way to remove it, right? You can remove Zelensky, and as long as all of the opposition, real opposition parties in the country are still banned, and all the media is critical media is banned, and Russians aren't allowed to speak, Russian ethnics and Russian speakers in Ukraine aren't allowed to speak Russian or worship even at the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, then it's still a Banderite fascist regime. And any elections that it holds can only result in another Banderite fascist, that of the Maidan Malu, right? So there's still no change of regime, and ultimately Russia's security, this is just going to have to be fought again in the future if it's not finished now. So Trump knows that, right? I acknowledge Trump hates the European leaders on a personal level. I think he has nothing but contempt for Zelensky and Yermak and his crew. He doesn't much care about Ukraine per se, but he is still the U.S. president. That is a U.S. proxy regime. And ultimately, what he is doing is trying to preserve that regime in some form into the future. Russia, meanwhile, is trying to use a brief window of opportunity for at least a temporary improvement of relations with the U.S. It may only last 4 years, if that, or, because no one knows what's going to happen in elections in 4 years in the U.S., right? Too much depends on the economy and other things, right? But ultimately, they know that these negotiations are probably not going to go anywhere. And even if they did, that's not good for Russia. Russia does not want peace except on their terms. And let's be honest, there is no real way to ever get the Kiev regime, right, to follow denazification, demilitarization, and, forever forswearing NATO without changing the regime. It's just not possible.
Okay, that's unfortunate. Like, the reason why I said it's unfortunate is because, look, I'm one of those people that want the war to end. I want it to end sustainably.
I only want it to end when it's done. And it's far away from done.
But I don't want it to be something where, okay, in 10 years, we're in another, at odds with the U.S. over this proxy regime.
It will, unless this regime is taken care of for now. There will be another conflict, at the very least, as soon as another Democrat or another neocon Republican is sitting in the White House, if not before that. Which is why, not only do I not think there is any viability for a successful, peaceful settlement of this conflict now or in the short-term future, I think it is extremely undesirable to Russia's interests and national security for any deal that would keep a Western-leaning Banderite fascist putsch regime in Kiev.
That means that Moscow will have to go to Kiev.
Yeah. Maybe further.
But see, they don't want to go further.
They don't, but there's no other good option. They don't want to, but they have to, right? I didn't want to at the beginning of this conflict. I going into Western Ukraine at the beginning of this conflict, I thought was suicidal. But at this point, it is the least bad option, because the only alternative is a permanent anti-Russian militarist state with all of its children indoctrinated to be future warriors against Russia. Zelensky has a picture of the burning Kremlin right outside of his office, right? And try to find me another more sane person than him within the Maidan regime, within the Rada, try to find me someone that is actually, Zaluzhny? He had 2 busts of Stepan Bandera in his military office, the big red and black flag, and the bust of Shukovich. There's no one more sane.
But that also means politically, Donald Trump has no one to work with in Ukraine.
Yes, he's looking at Yulia Tymoshenko, the gas princess, this old snake, right, brought out of a veritable political extinction, right? That's who the U.S. is, partly because she's presenting herself. She somehow finagled an invitation to Trump's inauguration, and she's being tossed around. That's whom they would like to see, right? And there's kind of a clear thing, right, where at some point Zelensky will agree to step down, theoretically, and Tymoshenko, who is a sitting MP, could then be declared Speaker of the Rada, right, by agreement from everyone. And then she would automatically become president if Zelensky steps down without the need for elections. But is that going to be, is Yulia Tymoshenko, right, the captured princess of the Maidan, going to be any better for Russia in the long term? No, because she's still going to be in charge of a Banderite fascist regime. Right? Poroshenko was an oligarch, right? An political insider and a candy oligarch, right? But he became a fire-breathing West Ukrainian nationalist and Banderite by the end of his administration. Zelensky was a Jewish ethnic comedian from Krivoy Rog, right? And he has internalized all of this and now has pictures of a burning Kremlin outside of his office, because the Maidan regime is undergirded. Its entire, mental infrastructure is built on Banderism, Banderite fascism. And until that regime in its entirety is swept out, any new figurehead, right, be it Poroshenko or Zelensky or Yulia Tymoshenko, Zaluzhny is already a Banderite fascist, but anyone you put in will inevitably, internalize, become a part of that, because that is what is the nature of the regime that they inherit. So you can't have free and fair elections in Ukraine. You can't have a change of political power to get rid of this Maidan regime. I don't know how to do it without an occupation of Kiev in one form or another, right? I mean, maybe the military will have melted away, but until you can someone else steps in and completely says, all these banned political parties, all these people representing the views of the people of East Ukraine, all these restrictions on language and culture and religion, all of these things that are supposedly European values, right, are upheld. Until you can force that, right, on Ukraine, then nothing will ultimately change. And I don't know how to do that.
And any deal that Trump makes saves them.
Yes, it saves them. Any deal he gets saves them. It doesn't remove them, it saves them. Yeah, you might get Zelensky out, and another person will just rise up out of the regime, right? This regime has solidified, from 2014 to 2022, right? I always said from the whole time that it was a mistake to let it solidify. But it is now in complete control of the body politic of Ukraine. Even if it is a cancer, even if most Ukrainians don't necessarily agree with it, there is no way to get it to release its hold. It's like an alien, right? From the franchise, stuck in the chest. You can't get that thing out of the person's body without cutting the body open and killing them in the process.
One last question. I would imagine Trump knows that these guys are far-right neo-Nazis. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I don't know if he cares.
I don't think he understands the degree. I don't think he understands.
Okay. If that's true, and if indeed that's the case, any guy and any person that he gets on some level is going to have to be able to sign a document saying, I want this war to end. And it has been said that anybody who signs that document is going to have to deal with the neo-Nazi with a gun, pointing directly at his head, saying, I will blow your head off.
If anyone actually did that, they would definitely turn on. There would be a civil war within the Maidan regime, which that would be great for Russia. That is, another possibility but in the end, at the end of that, Russian forces would have to go back in eventually anyway. Right, to clean up
that's my point, right? Like anybody that Trump gets to sign a document has to be done in a context where those neo-Nazis are either under leash or are gone.
How do you leash? You can't leash ideological hatred like that.
Right? And I guess that's kind of my point, right? Does it mean that if they get a deal, those people are not there in the context of a deal because they can't be there because you can't get a deal if they're there?
It's
meaning for Trump to get what he wants. Those neo-Nazis can't be a part of the government of Ukraine because I believe you're right.
They are a part of the government. They're all through the government. They're all through the RADA, the security services, the all of the institutions of power, the police. Right? You can't get rid of them unless you bring the whole thing down.
Jesus.
It's a catch-22, right? This is the monster that was created. Right? They do not represent the majority of Ukrainian people, but sometimes, right? Gramsci talked about this, a political minority that has all, the passion, the anger, and the willingness to use force can seize control of a much larger population to the degree that we see in Ukraine, right? Mm-hmm. This is that is fascist revolution 101, right? And they have effectively done that in Ukraine, and there's no good way to get them out. There's no happy ending to this. Yeah. There's only less bad options for everyone involved.
Well, them going is the most ideal. Let's put it that way.
But imagine the amount of bloodshed that will be necessary to remove them by force. And that's the only way to get rid of them.
There's no political out.
I can't see one. Mearsheimer can't see one.
Yeah.
I can't see one. I would prefer. How do you stop Nazis from being Nazis, right? How do you stop Jelani in Syria from being ISIS and a jihadist, right? Oh, that jihadism, that Banderite fascism, that was just a teenage phase. Like I was some teenage goth girl, right? I can get over that. Okay, right, whatever.
Yeah, you just chop heads. Yeah, I just chopped heads in my youth. I don't do it now. Yeah, that's kind of hard to get be on a head chopper. Mark.
Kofi, follow me.